Greetings, everyone. I am so glad that you are here to join me in celebration of version 10 of Breaking Change. I am your host, Justin Searles, and this is my personal podcast recorded for vanity purposes alone. So if you're new to the show, if you're joining here on our 10th anniversary, you might be surprised to note the absence of sponsors or dignity. And those are just two of the hallmark features of our show. We're gonna got a lot of life news, a lot of stuff to talk about, some follow-up from previous versions of the program. Aaron has dedicated a new pun just for you that I'm going to read on air for the first time. It is currently sitting in my iMessage in invisible ink. I'm worried about what it is already. We got some news, a lot of news to cover. This might be a long one. I never know how long these are going to run, but if it's less than 3 hours, am I really even trying? Is kind of how I think about it. Also, longest break between versions has been over 2 weeks. In fact, I'll come out right and say it, just so I can get out of the way, because this is going to dovetail us into the life news portion of the program. I think version 10, the breaking change, the new thing that wasn't true in the era of version 9, is that the Humane pin taught us a lot. The Humane A.I. pin taught us a lot about the future of consumer hardware and software and what it means to be a platform. So I'm going to title this, version 10, Inhumane A.I. There you go. That sounds good. So let's get into some life news. Let's chat about it. So I mentioned it's been a while. One reason it's been a while is Becky, she worked at a gym up until a little over a year ago. And she has mostly worked from home since then, delivering strength training programs as part of her Build with Becky service offering, which I am now helping her sassify by both being sassy and also making a SaaS product. But she's had a habit of going out to in-person gyms anyway. She's a social butterfly in comparison to me, who is more like a hermit crab. Sorry, we had a hermit crab. Slight tangent of a tangent here. We had a hermit crab when I was a kid, and his name was Mr. Hermie. Jeremy, my brother, does not listen to the program, I don't believe. If he does, he's never mentioned it, and he's not one to not mention this sort of thing. Mr. Hermie was a hermit crab. I have no idea where we got him. He was in a little blue cylindrical cage. And a hermit crab is a very low maintenance pet. Basically, Mr. Hermie had a yellow sponge. God, this is so sad. Sorry, like most pets, it didn't end well for Mr. Hermie because hermit crab lifespan is shorter than human lifespan. He had a little sponge. That was basically all he needed. It was this little sponge, and he would just kind of suck the water out of the sponge with one of his... I don't know what crabs have. Tendrils? No. Anyway, he'd nibble on the sponge and get his water. And we went on vacation, and our babysitter, Courtney, I even remember Courtney's last name, but for privacy reasons, I'm not going to mention it live on air. Courtney took care of everything in the house for my parents, forgot to moisten Mr. Hermie's sponge. And when we came back, Mr. Hermie was just a dried out husk. And that was when I learned about death, I suppose. Funny enough, this makes it 10 podcasts in a row where I've mentioned mortality. So it's nice to live close to the ground, I guess. Anyway, me, the hermit crab, Becky, the social butterfly. She used to go to the gym, go to yoga. She'd leave the house for long stretches, several days a week. And I wasn't offended by this, but we're both working at a slower pace these days. And actually, one of the nice things about our marriage is that we enjoy spending time together, and we enjoy it more with seemingly each passing year, thanks to putting work into, getting along better, I suppose. And I was like, we have like 3 rooms dedicated to gymming and fitness in the house. Is there stuff that we lack from an equipment perspective that if we only had that, then we would, then you wouldn't feel it necessary to drive half an hour to this other gym, and you could just feel comfortable working out at home. And she thought about it and realized that there were, yes, a handful of little things that if she had here, then she'd feel less compelled to leave the house for half a day. And so I get more time with Becky, and that's wonderful. It also ended with me having to drive alone 20 minutes with, 2 8x6 pieces of very thick, CrossFit gym turf that we'd bought from another gym. In my little tiny Escape, and it was such a tight fit that it was like pressing up against my head while I drove, because it just was bigger than the car, and so it was all bent up a little bit, but not so much that it would crease. But I did have to actually climb into the lift gate in the back to close it, because otherwise the safety would go off and it would reopen, and I had to hold it back and close the door from the inside, and then scurry out. Anyway, this is a long-winded way to say that we've remodeled one of our 3 gyms. It's not like our house is massive. It's a big house. We're very fortunate, but it's more that like, we don't have children. When you don't have children, you end up with a lot of free space, I think. And additionally, I don't want, if you're listening to this and you are a potential guest of Casa de Searles, and you've got kids, I would love to have you as a guest, but I wouldn't want to send the signal that your kids are welcome, because kids are sticky and they damage things, and I don't necessarily like them in increments larger than 15 minutes. And so instead of having 2 guest rooms, when we totally could have had 2 guest rooms in the home, I didn't want to send the signal to anybody that they were welcome to stay for very long, or to stay with a family larger than a couple. So we only had the 1 guest room, which freed up all sorts of room for activities from a fitness equipment perspective. So yeah, Becky's at home a lot more. What's that got to do with the long break between podcasts? It's like, well, the only time that I podcast has been when she's gone, because I'm a shy podcaster. I'm afraid to talk into a microphone like a goddamn idiot. If somebody else can hear me in the other room being such a tool bag. So Becky, actually, she's running in a 10K on Saturday. It's one of these Disney has all these jogging and marathon-y kind of events. I don't know anything about it. I run every day, and I couldn't be less interested in running with people. Gross. Ugh. Running is to, deal with one's own shame in silence, or listening to a podcast. So if you're running while you're listening to this to keep the voice inside your head at bay, I'm here for you. So yeah, she's going on this 10K for the first time, first group 10K for her on Saturday morning, and she's got to go pick up her bib, and she's going with a friend, and they're going to find a way to make this take 2 hours. So I've got some time to chat with y'all. And so the new limiting factor, the new schedule for the show isn't every Wednesday or something. It's whenever Becky leaves for more than a couple hours, and I've got a list of more than 10 things to talk about. Boom. Break and change time. That's what we say around here. Break and change time. We don't really say, I don't like that. All right. Bathroom. Our bathroom remodel. Last time we spoke, I talked about how it was complete, and it had been complete for a while, and we hadn't moved back in pending reorganization of our clothes and the drawers and everything, so that we would kind of, make an more efficient use of the same space that we had previously. That is complete. and it went wonderfully. All the surfaces are clear. Everything is clean. We're humming at 98% efficiency, which is how I like to see it. And additionally, the bathroom is quite nice. Becky gave a 5-star review of the new bathtub. It got a great view of the nature preserve behind our home. I enjoy the new shower because I don't have to. It's got one of those cool dials where you set the temperature once and forget about it, and then you just have buttons to turn on each of the shower heads separately. And so that's pretty neat, because then I don't have to deal with the burst of cold water as I turn it up. I just have to deal with it takes a minute, because we have a tankless water heater, for any hot water to exist at all, which is a separate problem that turns out very hard to solve once you have it. But the biggest takeaway I had about the bathroom project was about Q-tips. So if you know what a Q-tip is, I don't know if this is an American only product, but it's a cotton swab stick with little swabs on either end. And if you buy Q-tips from the beauty section of your drugstore or whatever, the back will say, "Hey guys, just between us, warning, whatever you do, don't stick the Q-tips in your ear." And then you look at the Q-tip and you're like, well, what else the fuck am I supposed to do with it? It's what everyone does with these. And you stick it in your ear because it feels good to get the wax out, to dry out, if you got moisture. If it's moist in there. It's what Q-tips do. But, you hear about, the certain amount of wax can be good. You stick it into, the reason they put that there is liability, right? Everybody knows at Q-Tip Corp what the Q-tips are for. They just can't say it on the box. So you gotta be in the know. It's an if you know kind of thing. Everyone knows the Q-tips go in your ear, but if you burst your eardrum, they don't want to be liable. So they tell you, hey, the Q-tips don't go in your ear. Wink, wink. So I didn't have Q-tips for over a month. I didn't have access to them because I wasn't living in the bathroom that had the gigantic box of Q-tips. That was over in a cabinet far away. And I decided, hey, I moved back in. I haven't Q-tipped in a while. Let's give it a try. And I Q-tipped, and content warning, you're going to want to scrub ahead 20 seconds here. Maybe make it 40. I hadn't Q-tipped in a long time, over a month. And I thought, well, my ears are really wet. This is gross. And I rubbed a Q-tip in the ear, and there was more wax than the Q-tip could. It was not a load-bearing Q-tip. It was a smaller one. Maybe that was why, but it couldn't handle it. I had to use both sides on just one ear. And okay, end of content warning. That was pretty gross, sure, but it's a lot of waxy buildup. It made me think yes, you shouldn't put Q-tips in your ear, sure. And yes, some amount of wax is probably good. But I had just been thinking that morning, boy, everything sounds muffled on Earth. I can't hear shit. I know I can't normally hear shit because I don't listen to people, but even when I'm trying, it sounds like I'm in a goddamn aquarium. And then I just stuck these things in my ears, and then magically it was better. So this is this podcast was brought to you by Q-tips. : stick them in your ear. Why don't you? Breaking change does not constitute health advice. Simply wellness. Another life update where my little hobby Rails app that I'm building for Becky's business is now a life update because I'm doing it for my wife. It's not, it doesn't feel like business to me because I'm not charging dollars for it. It is I guess work for hire. I should have a contract in place with Becky where I just say hey, it's $0 an hour. Anyway, I decided I use projects like this sometimes to challenge my UI and UX skills because I'm more of a backend developer by training. And I want to make a cool UI. I want to make it nice. I want to make it fast. And Rails 7, the newest version of Rails and all of its front end tools that allow you to build nice experiences in the front end without having to write a whole lot of hinky JavaScript that's super fragile. has been an interesting challenge, and I've learned a ton. And one of the ones that I wanted to try that I'd never quite pulled off before, that was actually one of the first projects that Todd and I did at Test Double, was a UI where we had lots of drag and drop and lots of nesting. And we had to, without giving away the client or what we were building, it was like a device board, like a page of devices, and those devices could belong in homes, and those homes belonged in neighborhoods, and those neighborhoods belonged in like regions. And you had to be able to like drag every kind of thing at every kind of layer all over the place. And we tried to do this in Backbone.js in 2011, and it went, or 2012 maybe, it went very poorly. And so here I was like, I wonder if I could do the 4-layer nacho dip of nested forms successfully, all in one page, all in one UI, and keep it responsive, right? Because like if you've got 4 levels of nesting, you're going to kind of want to indent each type of thing as you have like, well, this form can have one to many of this form underneath it, and that form can have one to many of this thing. And I pulled it off. I accomplished nested attribute inception in this project, where you build a workout, a strength training program that would have 1 to 3 workouts. You'd go and click, you make the workout, and then you'd have 1 to many blocks of exercises. So you create the block, you have how many sets are on the block, and then you create 1 to many exercises underneath those. And then each exercise has different variations of like, barbell versus like bands or body weight and so forth. And then you underneath that, you have like the set configurations, like how many reps for each of the sets on the block. And I got what is that? That's 6 layers of nesting in a single UI. And I got it to be responsive without any indentation, without, with some drag and drop, but with like, it actually all worked quite nicely. It was just a lot. It sounds like a lot. It took me a while to get through that explanation. It might still make no sense to you. But it was an interesting challenge for me, and it really helped boost my self-confidence as a developer, because now if I can make that work and be relatively pleasant and performant, then I can make anything. And nested forms in Rails had always been, or nested forms generally, from a UI and from a getting this to work perspective, have always been something that of a white whale for me, difficult for me to wrap my head around completely. And every time I did it, I felt like I was reinventing the universe. And now I got like a really consistent approach, and I really understand how to do it, so that when I have to do it the next time, like I did 3 days later when I showed this to Becky, and she's like, yo, this is a little much. Can you break this up into a couple different pages? Which I had to do. And then I did. Now I've got a consistent approach. I feel good about it. And that confidence is what makes you fast at programming. If anything makes you fast, it's like the confidence that like, I've been in this hole before. I know how to get out. I've got a few different tricks up my sleeve, things to try when stuff doesn't work and I'm just staring. So as to combat blank page syndrome. So anyway, if you're a developer, or if you can relate this to the kind of work that you do, sometimes taking time to practice or do things to the extreme, to the absolute limit, to the, point of absurdity, can really force you to generalize a solution and think like, oh, well, like, sure, I could get away with nesting 2 levels of forms or 3 levels of forms this kind of hacky way. But if you're going to do 6 layers, that's going to fall over. And so like it forced me to come up with a general solution. So now like the amount of boilerplate that I need to write for each of these models going forward forever is way less. In fact, it might, if I was still the kind of person who wanted to make open source, which I am not at the moment, it might make for a good open source thing. Like a little, I don't know, some kind of form management gem for Rails. So, other life stuff. I had an idea. I have a lot of app ideas and project ideas. I don't normally talk about them, not because ideas are valuable and I'm going to totally get around to them someday, but I telling somebody your app idea is like only 2 notches higher on the ethical standard of what you talk about in conversation, 2 notches higher than telling somebody about your dreams. So you'll never believe this dream. The idea that I have, and this is something that Kathy Colliver, the director of marketing at Test Double, and I spent most of the last 3 years trying to figure out. As Twitter, say what you want about Elon, Twitter is no longer the only place where what's happening is happening in real time on the internet. And it's no longer the watering hole for the vast majority of programmers in our little pond. You know, they're spread out now between Twitter and Threads and Mastodon, and what I think is probably the true of like once there was not an authoritative Twitter-like place where everybody was, nobody has to be anywhere. And so a lot of people just opted out and don't really pay attention anymore. So that's the theory of the case behind this justin.searls.co website that I made. And I've talked about this in actually other people's podcasts, but you know, the idea being I just want to own my own website and I want to anti-socially blat it out into as many different mediums as possible so that other people can consume my content, keep up with me to the extent that they want and no more. And if they ever want to reach out, they can just email me and I will respond to the email. That's how I wound up, you know, doing that. Works for me because as mentioned, this is a vanity project. This is a non-commercial podcast so far. If you'd like to sponsor this podcast, I've got some great therapists to refer you to. Just email me, podcast@searls.co, and explain yourself. Where this isn't such a great kind of state of affairs, though, is that there's no longer an easy way to be discovered, right? The reason that my career took off was I was tweeting, and I was tweeting a lot, and I was replying to other people, and I was stirring the pot, and I was relatively provocative, so I'd get quote tweeted, and then I'd, you know, go have to take a cold bath after, you know, somebody glancingly calling me a racist or a sexist or getting mad at me for some other, you know, turn of phrase that I used and how it was insensitive in this and that way. And being really provocative and also really sensitive is like not the smartest combo if you're going to be a very online creature like myself. But it also was a great way to sharpen my communication skills, better understand myself, understand what worked, how people responded, and most importantly, for like the purposes of my career, I think it was a platform where discovery happened passively, and I would pick up followers just by existing. You know, more people would follow. I got up to like 20,000, I think, at some point. And then that you know, there's a certain amount of spillover into other, you know, platforms. But importantly, if you show up and you are just creating and you're just present and you're sharing good takes that people like, people would show up. People would find you. And this is actually like pre-algorithm, right? Like even if it was just retweets and manual stuff, and there wasn't some recommendation engine pushing my content into other people's timelines, people would find me and then they'd follow me and they'd decide, hey, I like or dislike the cut of this guy's jib, and I'm gonna opt into seeing his garbage spew into my timeline of other garbage. And sometimes I will fave. And sometimes I will quote tweet. That is over. That's just not how any of this works anymore. You know, like Mastodon is anti-discovery in a lot of ways. It's very, very insular. Everything about how Mastodon's UI works, even how Federation works, makes it really, really difficult to get discovered there, to go anything close to quote unquote viral. Twitter is just a tire fire now. It barely even works. If you go to like a profile page of somebody, you'll just see like 5 random tweets from the last 4 years in nonsense order. You know, the algorithm is only promoting the, you know, morons who will pay $10 for the blue check. I'm going to maybe, you know, if I die, since I already broke the mortality pudding skin of this program's episode, if I die, please put "Here lies Justin Searls," who was a blue check mark before Elon made those things kind of vaguely white supremacist. I had a real blue check mark. And I don't know how much of my credibility of how people viewed me as meaningful or as a somebody could be attributed to that like little like PNG file that was sort of almost randomly thrown onto my profile because I filled out a form during a golden 3-day period where Twitter was actually looking at applications for blue check marks. I have no idea, but that was a platform, that was a moment probably through, I'd say 2017, 2018. Definitely like COVID changed that platform into more just of like an outrage engine of doom scrolling. So I feel like I got mine, right? But I don't want to say fuck you. I think that the discovery side of this is still an unsolved problem. And so this is a long-winded way, as you know, it's a long-winded show, so I guess that's fine. It's a long-winded way to wind up to say, if I were just starting out today, what the fuck would I do? If I were the exact same person wanting to make a career by having pointed thoughts following observations of common problems in the software industry, how would I share them and how would they get traction? And the most straightforward answer to that would be do video, do short form video. And right now do short form vertical video and then cross post it to YouTube Shorts, Instagram Reels, and TikTok. And I would probably have done that hustle. And it would have required even more, far more. Video is so much harder than audio, is so much harder than text. I don't think that Becky would have stayed with me if I'd been a TikTok boy for the first 10 years of our marriage. She barely tolerated me being, if not staring at my phone on Twitter, like my brain locked up in rumination about Twitter for so long. And I really regret those years, even if they did redound certain benefits to me. So people ask me for advice about this shit a lot. And they're like, well, how do I make a name for myself? How do I do what you did? I'm like, well, short of building a time machine, there's not a lot you can do. And I wouldn't recommend that you just become a TikTok human. So I don't know what to tell people, but I would love to be able to tell them, just make a blog, just make a website, just like mine. And whatever multimedia you fashion yourself as wanting to produce, whether that's audio like this, or short videos, or blog posts, or link posts, or like tweet like little shower thoughts, or photos and carousels of photos. Just like, my blog, if you go on the left side, I've got all those different kind of categories. They're all, and most of them contribute to the main feed, except for the newsletter, which is kind of off on its own thing. I would tell people, like, I want to be able to tell people, just go do that. Because then that way you are the captain of your own ship. You are able to publish whatever you want, whenever you want, however you want. You own your data. You're not responding to what an algorithm wants. So you're not wound up in this feedback loop of feeling rewarded when you make your thumbnails increasingly thirsty, because that'll attract more clicks, Like YouTube Shorts, for example, like it has algorithmic thumbnails. You can't pick the thumbnail for your YouTube short. And so when I scroll down, I've finally gotten the apps to stop recommending me shorts. Like if you click the little ellipsis, you can get it to stop. But like every single YouTube short that ever gets recommended to me is always a still of a attractive lady figure. And I don't watch enough shorts for me to have been the one to train it to present that to me. But if you ever click on a short that has one of those screenshots, you'll find like, oh yeah, like there was like a random woman as the camera was panning to the left. and because the algorithm has figured out that YouTube, which is a male dominated platform, I think it's like 80-20 men consuming YouTube, shorts will get way more clicks. Oh, yeah, then again, the problem with the female form as a marketing ploy in social media algorithms is that like both men and women tend to prefer clicking on women. so it ends up being so over-indexed that the algorithm is now over-torqued because all of the deep learning did was figure out, oh, sexy lady, people like clicking that. So make that the thumbnail of absolutely everything. And if your short doesn't have like, enough stills of sexy ladies in them, then it's going not to get downranked to hell, but it's not going to be competitive in the, auto-generated screenshot thumbnail, ecosystem. That's no way to live, right? Like if I was making short form video because I was an auteur and I was like, I got stuff to say, and then I'm shouting into my camera, right? And I'm speaking truth to power about this software thing, but then I got to remember, okay, now's the 5 seconds in the middle where I pan over to my Farrah Fawcett poster on the wall, and then I pan back to me so that the YouTube Shorts algorithm can go and screen cap that, make that the auto-generated cover image, and then that'll be the thing that the people click on because they're idiots in the UI. Like, I want people just to be able to make a goddamn website and develop their own voice as a writer and tussle with what they find interesting and how to make that sound interesting to other people. And we've had such the algorithms pull all the content to these polls that are like whatever the algorithm is optimizing for is the thing that all content eventually asymptotically will approach, to the point where it's just boring. And I feel like we'd get so much more creativity if we went back to, call it the Tumblr, LiveJournal, Blogspot era of people just doing their own thing, doing weird stuff and getting word of mouth traction. But we don't have a way to discover that stuff anymore. Search is worse than ever. No one's using RSS. This is a hard problem, the discovery problem, right? And if you are in media, you spend probably, or if you're in a marketing role, you probably spend a lot of time thinking about how to solve discovery. How will people find you? And people are going back to all sorts of old-fashioned ideas that are still totally valid, but everything's harder now because almost everything we do is mediated by these 5 platforms that all, like LinkedIn, have really aggressive timeline algorithms that try to get you to produce content in the way they think will perform best. And by perform best, it doesn't mean create the best experience. It usually means generates the most revenue. So anyway, this idea, which if you're still listening to this long-winded explanation, you can just have it. Go ahead and build this. I'd prefer if you did, because I don't think I'm going to have time to. I would love a discovery engine that sort of sidled up to the blogosphere, kind of similar to like how Last.fm had nothing to do with the music industry, but they invented this scrobbling tool, and you could scrabble, quote unquote, like have an agent on your computer listen to what you were listening to from your music library, and then the music that got played the most, that had the most scrobbling on Last.fm would elevate up into the rankings, and people who were like, thoughtful music listeners would then in turn become, kind of curators of what's good to listen to on that platform, all generated by this data that was like, what are individuals actually listening to on the computers? And now, of course, that's all locked up behind Spotify and Apple Music, and it's highly proprietary. I don't think a lot of people are still scrobbling out there, and I'm not even sure how hard or easy it is to scrabble. What a great verb. What if we had something similar for blogs and for personal websites, or like non-commercial, non-mainstream, not like, I think maybe the line would be anything smaller than having like an Apple News publisher account. So probably not a lot of ads, probably, a lot of personal blogs, a lot of personal sites, a lot of really small outfits or hobbyists, kind of like, interest blogs, right? What if we had a relatively centralized platform that simply crawled all of these things and then used LLMs to summarize their general vibe and categorize them across, call it 10 different dimensions? Hey, this place posts these kinds of short posts. They have this kind of tone of voice in terms of sentiment analysis. They cover this topic. They link to these places in their posts, and the identity or the biography of the author falls into these kind of buckets. And you just capture that kind of stuff, and you have you have a crawler that indexes and pulls down a lot of the pages, and then you push that through an LLM to do a routine analysis and ask, you can ask ChatGPT, hey, give me JSON back. So you can ask for in the form of structured data, and you could basically create a shadow index of the internet, not based on answering questions for a Google search engine purpose, which is what Google's optimized for, but instead on give me the general vibe of this blog, of this website. And then what the platform would do wouldn't just be a dumb directory. Right now, there's a lot of directories going up for blogs and sites to try to solve this discovery problem, but they're all just you fill out a form about what your site's about, and then it just goes on to a list of 300 other, no one's going to click through and try each and every blog for a week. You gotta have something to tell you, you're going to like this. And when I was following blogs in 2000, 2001, 2002 for the first time, it was always the blogger would write a post and say, hey, and link to somebody else. And I would see maybe a block quote of that author and I'd be like, oh, they got an interesting take. And I would go and check them. And then there'd be a dialogue between blogs. And I still think that's fantastic when it can happen. But we don't even need that much, because we could build a system that would take all of these LLM generated summaries and categorizations to typify different sites, and then simply ask the person what blogs they like, and have them kind of generate a profile of oh, I follow Justin Searles, right? And I follow Aaron Patterson. And then it might be hey, looking at kind of the sphere in our graph that we've built from scraping these different blogs, you might really like Nate Berkopak's blog because it's about Ruby performance. And this is seemingly pretty achievable. It's not one of those you could build it in a weekend, or you could build it and have zero server infrastructure costs, because crawling the internet is extremely expensive. But imagine if to get reach, instead of telling marketing to the universe, hey, go to blogdiscovery.zone, you created widgets for creators like myself that maybe I could put, an iframe on my page, or even better, some kind of static HTML package that I could pull down that would just populate a little div on my sidebar that said, hey, other shit like this shit. If you like me, you're going to like this stuff, right? And it would have enough useful information to make it worth my while to share that. Or maybe an auto-generated post for the creator every month. Hey, here's the stuff that's happening this month. Other stories in the blogosphere that are, relevant to your audience based on the similarities of those sites and your site. And the things that you post about. And you could just have that the platform could generate that markdown, for you in however many formats, with the integration buttons to all the other kind of platforms like WordPress and stuff. And you could just copy paste it and say, hey, look, what I, Justin, get as a blogger, I get a free post every month. And what the platform gets is, this is a way to get, people looking at our platform and also looking at all these other blogs. So I really think there's something there. If you're interested in this idea, do email me, podcast@searles.co. Yeah, I think discovery isn't going to solve itself. Somebody is going to have to make a non-VC backed, non-tech giant built platform for discovering all the content on the internet, because Google is dying. The LLMs don't necessarily do a good job of this either, because they're kind of all honing in on, they're being trained to try to give people facts as much as possible. And I don't think that they're going to be able to fan out into a really creative vibe and and it would take people prompting them very carefully to say, hey, I'm interested in this, and this. What are some other blogs I might like, for example? That's a lot of work for the individual. And this approach, you could make it, I don't know, ad supported. You can make it like, premium placement, like little tiny things like that. It would be a nice lifestyle business maybe if you wanted to make money off of this. But it's not something that any large tech company would build and share openly. They would want to turn this all into a way to increase lock-in in their platform. Or if you were a VC-backed startup, the data scraping that you could do would be the value. And either of those would directly undercut the actual discovery benefit, the stated purpose of the app. So somebody take that and please run with it. Let's move into follow-up. In a recent version of Breaking Change, I talked a little bit about structurally why the AAA gaming business is on the decline and structurally is at this impasse where games become more and more expensive to build, a smaller audience wants to play them, and they can't reasonably get the average selling price up nearly enough per game to offset that decline. And so, especially investors, they want to see growth, they want to see more money getting made. Well, Kotaku had a real sad story. The headline: 60% of playtime in 2023 went to 6-year-old or older games. And you can imagine what those games were. Games like Minecraft, Fortnite, Roblox. They suck up so much of the playtime. If you've ever followed the streaming video business, it might have seemed weird that Netflix, their primary metric for engagement, wasn't how many episodes of the show did somebody watch or whatever. It was always how many minutes are our customers streaming this content. And if it's the more minutes, the better. And so you end up with these like padded out, like super long reality shows or whatever, or just like really long series like that sop up as many human minutes as possible. Because the reason for that, you might ask, like, why, if it's charged monthly, do they care how much you're using it? I mean, technically, the more you watch, the more that they have to pay for servers. Because Netflix knows, and now I think all the other video streamers have learned, that if you sop up more minutes of somebody's attention, that attention, and this is before ads, of course, with ads there, now it's just gangbusters. But if you can sop up more of those minutes, then the person, obviously, they're far less likely to cancel because they're going to be thinking each month when they think about canceling, well, I watch a lot of that, right? But that means that you're stiff-arming the competition because every minute that they're watching your thing, they're not watching somebody else's thing. And so from a competitive analysis perspective, if your minutes watched per month per user keep going up, you're boxing out the competition. And this is exactly what happened in gaming too. When Minecraft came out, and then year 2 and year 3 and year 4 of Minecraft, it just kept getting bigger. And now you've got Minecraft kids, like people who've only ever played Minecraft and had no interest in other games. Where Minecraft became sort of a pseudo platform, and now we have Fortnite, which is trying to become a platform and like literally have apps and games inside the game that you can buy, which I'm sure that, Tim Sweeney as a warrior for freedom is going to allow absolutely anyone to publish whatever they want and that he won't take any cut. Because that's how Epic rolls. You have people who identify with a particular game and they just play only that game. And so if I'm playing, let's say, Minecraft or Apex Legends or Valorant, and that's where all my friends are, then I come to identify myself as playing that game. Every minute that I play that game, like those games now, they're like live service games is the phrase. If they go viral, if they find an audience, and if they click, they can just create their own treadmill, similar to how like MMOs, massively multiplayer games, used to, like World of Warcraft and so forth. They can create a content and a grind treadmill that to put players on that rewards every minute that they play, because they're just effectively little Skinner boxes of, oh, well, if I buy the battle pass and I put in just a few more hours this month into the battle pass of game time, and I play so many more matches and I win so many more matches and I earn this much more XP, then I'll unlock insert, novelty helmet or Banana Man skin or some nonsense. So the games, even more than video, I think games, live service games that have gotten their hooks into an audience will be able to engineer that attention through the interactivity element, through the fact that, like, if you just push a little bit harder, we'll give you this cookie, and we know exactly how to time those out because we've hired a lot of psychologists who can't make as good of money elsewhere to tell us exactly when, or set up the experiments and the A/B tests, maybe on contract, set up these analytics that we have to tell us, like, how long and how long to make this game loop before I give the reward, right, to maximize engagement. And so it's not like an accident. It's not Minecraft, I think in a sense it opened the door to this, but now every live service game that is designed, whether it's like Destiny or, Fortnite or Apex Legends or Valorant or Call of Duty in its various incarnations, all of these games are engineered to be optimized as time goes on by a relatively large staff to continue to keep people addicted to just those games. And it's for the same reason Netflix measures engagement in minutes. It's if we can keep more people in the game, if we can reduce churn and pull in just enough new people that we're still growing, then we can take the assets and all of the sunk costs into this game that we initially had, which might be significantly lower initial investment compared to even a normal AAA single player game with a lot of voice acting, right, and a lot of narrative and a lot of environments. Like it might be a relatively cheap initial investment, and then the ongoing investment would be peanuts compared to the potential profits of kids buying battle passes and skins for years and years to come. That is an incredibly attractive business model. So later in this article, this fact is what made me write it down. Only 8% of video game playtime was spent on new non-annual titles like Diablo 4 or Baldur's Gate 3. New non-annual titles. So that's like 8% is not a lot. And the AAA gaming space is already shrinking. And if live service games are soaking up almost all this playtime, it means people are buying fewer games. And if people are buying fewer games, or if they're, there used to be people like, 10, 15 years ago that I would know that would like, oh yeah, I buy Madden and whatever the Call of Duty is. And that's all I buy. And I always thought that was nutso. I was like, what? There's all these cool and interesting games. There's tons of games. And I would spend, way too much of my money buying lots of games a year. And now I look at my own behavior. And in my case, it's because of Xbox Game Pass, where I have that subscription and it's got like plenty of stuff. And I've got a handful of, games in my Steam library that I seem for whatever reason to keep coming back to. Like I'd mentioned Stardew Valley. Next time, maybe it's No Man's Sky. I don't buy nearly as many games myself anymore either. So how the industry is handling it, right, is not just layoffs and being resigned to this fate. It means that like all these major publishers are trying their damnedest to make these live service games. And what they don't seem to realize, or if they do realize it, they delude themselves into thinking that they're going to be successful at it, is that for a live service game to be successful, it needs to reach that like network effect where lots of people want to play, right? So there's always people to play with. That's hard. A lot of games, 2 weeks after they launch, the multiplayer lobbies are empty because you have to have people in it all the time. And as soon as there's no one in it, if you're the next person to pop into that lobby and you see nobody there, you're going to log immediately back out. So these games with multiplayer components will very often die within like days. A live service game requires a huge audience. And if you don't find that audience right away, like it creates a death spiral almost instantly. And so executives delude themselves into thinking like, well, live service is where it's at because that's the right business model. and we will just market our way into, an angle, an audience, and then we'll make it work. And now what we're seeing, this was, what people were talking about in the industry 3 years ago. What we've seen in the last year is like none of the new live service games are clicking because every genre already has one dominant one. And it's really hard. They're sticky audiences. It's really hard to peel people away. So additionally, there's another article, I think also on Kotaku, about how like game developers just absolutely hate this because live service games aren't really games. They're kind of like, they're the equivalent of Candy Crush, like mobile games that prey on human psychology as opposed to deliver gameplay experiences that are actually very good, much less narrative experiences that tell a story interactively. So the industry is just kind of super fucked. Thus concludes the gaming related follow-up. I don't know what to say about that. Unlike the thing about the discovery engine for blogs, I would strongly recommend you don't take this idea and run with it. Don't go make a game right now, unless you've got a lot of runway and a lot of passion. Another follow-up, I'd mentioned in my newsletter a couple of months ago about this book, The Courage to be Disliked, a practical philosophy book that is a Socratic dialogue discussing the insights of Alfred Adler's clinical psychology and psychological research in the early 20th centuries. And it was, I finally finished the book. I finished it in Japanese. It took me like 5 months. And part why it took me so long is I would read a couple of pages and then distract myself thinking of all the ways that I could apply it to myself and my life and use it to play back challenging interactions that I had with family, with coworkers, moments in my past. So I don't believe in recommending books, but it was a really, really impactful one for me. And one of the things that the book closes on is the discussion. It's effectively a series of pieces of advice that ladder up to a virtuous cycle that lead to a more fulfilling and happier life that is free of the burdens of other people's expectations. Because a lot of the advices that it gives have an interleaving quality to them where if you are careful about separating your tasks from other people's tasks so you're not interfering with their tasks, and you also avoid making vertical comments, like or establishing a vertical relationship with somebody by either seeking their praise or offering a lot of compliments or criticism, then you can establish horizontal relationships with people. And that makes it easier to separate tasks because now you don't feel like you're in charge of, or they're in charge of, how you do what you do. Like it was just two little tiny bits out of 20 that the book discusses. One of the last ones that it talks about was the idea that you should live in the moment. If you're doing all these other things, live in the moment and think in terms of, not in a hedonistic sense, just do whatever you want to do right now, but like truly be present. Don't have like a dim light on at all times where you're seeing all of the past of your life and everything in the future. And so you're not fully living in the present. You're instead like tighten the spotlight and really, really just think about the moment that you're in and be the person that you are in the moment, because it's the only thing that really exists right now. The past and the future don't exist in that moment. And like, so live every moment like you're dancing through it. And if you wind up having danced to a different place, and if whatever you're doing in the present takes you someplace, then great. Now, like this book is originally written in Japanese, and so like I don't know the exact terms that they'd use, and I'm just now realizing as I'm speaking that sometimes it's difficult because like I'm not translating directly because the words might escape me a little bit. But that was all to say, living in the moment as opposed to like long-term planning of career goals. And in a Socratic dialogue, there's always like the smart person and then the youthful idiot that kind of exists as a foil so that the smart person can just, play off of their naivety. The young person is like, well, if you tell me to live in the moment, how would anyone ever become a concert violinist or a lawyer, right? Where it takes tons and tons and tons of pain that you have to overcome to get to that point. And the philosopher replies, effectively saying, it is true that probably like most people who become concert violinists and become lawyers did it because with that end goal in mind and did not live in the present. Instead, they thought that like the whole slog of their existence until that final zenith where they pass the bar exam or they are first chair in a, fancy orchestra, they kind of put their life on pause. They put their happiness on the shelf and they lie to themselves and they think, if only I had reached this, will I then be happy? But it's just as true that it's possible. If you just like playing the violin, you could just play the violin a lot and get similarly good at playing the violin by living in the moment and actually enjoying playing it. And we're not necessarily talking about two different people. It's two different approaches, right? If you play the violin because you got your eye to the future and you're just thinking about like, hey, this what I'm doing right now is the suffering that I'm going to go through so that I can then flick a switch when I turn 25 or 30 and be good enough to be playing in an orchestra. And like, then I'll be happy and then I'll know what to do. But the thing about it is, if you've spent your entire life being miserable and suffering, once you make it, you will be like, and I am living proof of this because this is how I lived my life, right? Like I was like always on to the next thing, always thinking about I'm doing this so that I can do this next, so that I can do that next, so that I can do that next, and gaming out things many steps in advance. And when I finally had everything that I thought that I ever wanted, I was like, I have spent all this time getting really, really good at what I do. And what do I do is be miserable and lie to myself that all that misery was for this moment. And once I reached this moment, I wouldn't be miserable anymore. And then when it turns out that like, actually I reach it and I'm still miserable, that is a tremendous crisis of conscience, right? It's like, oh shit, everything that I thought about what I'd been working up to in my career or in my personal life that I thought would make me happy doesn't. Now this is very trite, right? Like this is like this is something that I don't know how many times in art and literature and movies, you see the trope of the person who fails to live in the moment, who how many holiday movies about like, a workaholic that reforms themselves and then learns the spirit of Christmas or some bullshit, right? We all know it in theory. But this book really, really made it practical and brought it home to me in a way that, and I can't tell you whether or not it's because I was reading in a foreign language, which required me to read it very, very slowly and through less of a filter because it wasn't using language that I've already learned to tune out. So it might just be that this is like a very basic message, but because it was like challenging to read because there was a lot of like hard vocabulary, it defeated my ability to tune it out. Anyway, that's a thought that I had. I'd recommend Courage to be Disliked. Good book. I don't recommend books. I almost said I recommend it, but nope. It's just a book. It's out there. Check it out. If you want to read it in Japanese, it'll take you longer. Probably. I moved on to my next book, by the way. So that is the fifth book I've read in Japanese. I've found that reading books is an excellent way to improve one's speaking ability as well. I was super skeptical of this, but I think that the turns of phrase that come to mind are so much more natural to me now. And I actually am starting to use more of the vocabulary, even though I'm not drilling on the memorization of the vocabulary directly. Authors tend to use the same words a bunch, and so you get a lot of exposure to the same words, phrases, turns of phrase. And I wanted something practical next. So actually, talk about recommendations. I I did ask ChatGPT, here's the 5 books I've read. What should I read next if I want some practical everyday language? And it gave me 2 really good recommendations. One of them was called Konbini Ningen, which means convenience store human. About a 36-year-old woman who's a little bit of an oddball who works at a convenience store. And the first opening pages are, if you've ever been to a convenience store in Japan, all the bangers, all the plot beats of what it's like in the morning, surely, for a staff member at a convenience store. And it's an interesting book. It's a very, very popular book. It's not particularly challenging from a language perspective, because it is so everyday life. But that's what makes it valuable to me, right? Like, I want the everyday life stuff. No interest in fantastical stories of dragons or historical epics, right? That are going to use a lot of language that wouldn't be practical to me. So like, instead of just be like, oh, cool, this is was it kakari? Like this is a slang word that women use to refer to katsuo boshi, like shaved fermented bonito skin flakes. Like, I don't know. Maybe I'll hear that, bit of slang, and then I'll remember, that's what she's referring to. So books, I don't like them, but they're too long and they're boring. But they're a great way to learn language, so I'm soldiering on. Speaking of soldiering on, we're an hour in. We still haven't done the pun cast. Aaron Patterson, Tender Love, as some may know him. He contributes a pun to the show every week. It's been over 2 weeks. Every version of the podcast, he contributes a pun. This time, I gave him some kind of prompt. I don't remember. We're gonna... Oh boy. Yes, this is a reference to something we're going to discuss later. Writing an emulator seems like a lot of work if you just want to game the system. Boy, this is a dense one. This is packed. This is like there are 3 hidden meanings in this pun that we will make sense of shortly. Writing an emulator seems like a lot of work if you just want to game the system. I like it. I'm going to try to copy paste this now. Copy. And hey, look at that. Version 10 of the podcast. Today's date, as I record this, is April 18th, 2024. Hello. We're coming up hot on May. We're just cruising through 2024. Where would I rank this one? Oh, man. I think... Okay, so our number 4 one right now. Do you know that en garde is French? I learned that while studying on Duolingo. That's pretty... That was last time, so that's pretty forced. I'm not gonna... This one's better than that. The one right above it is also gaming related. I loved playing AAA games as a kid, but replacing the batteries got real expensive. I think this one's even better because it's about the news story. It encapsulates this news story about a kid wanting to actually work around App Store limitations. Which, if that doesn't make sense to you, it will momentarily. I'm gonna call this the new number 3 because I think Breaking Change, the inaugural pun, Breaking Change, sorry, I don't carry cash, is still a little bit better because it stands alone more. This is definitely more of a contemporaneous pun. So that, hey, Aaron's punning has improved because 9, 8, 10 are currently in positions 5, 4, 3, respectively. Version 6 is our current number 1. All right. Thank you, Aaron, for the pun. If you're interested in the spreadsheet, I've shared the link in the past. And I will share it again if you ask. So email me and I will send you the current ranking so that you too may stare at this list and try to figure out if it's in the right order. All right. So if you're an experienced listener, you know that I follow a pretty strict format, and you might even remember that after the pun, it's news time. That's the time where the news is discussed. I like to follow a strict format because it helps me stay somewhat focused. I would say that this is it's an unserious podcast for serious people. And having a little bit of structure is the best way for people like us to have a good time. So, news. Here over in Disney World, where I live, if you're not familiar, I live next door to Disney World. So if you're ever in Orlando, podcast at searles.co, and we will, I'd be glad to go meet you, as long as you're not too weird. Sorry, man. But if you're super weird, don't email me. But if you're just kind of weird, I think that's fine. So now that you know where I am, local news here tends to become national news really quickly, right? Like the DeSantis Reedy Creek nonsense, like still ongoing and relevant to my personal life because I'm currently trying to get what used to be called Reedy Creek to agree that I can knock down the tree behind my house, because I'm pretty sure it's on my land, but they're pretty sure that they're responsible for maintaining that land. So it's, what's that phrase? All politics is local. Here in local Disney politics, Disney has recently announced changes to the Disney Accessibility Service, which is a program that is designed to make the parks accessible and enjoyable for folks who have pretty severe mobility issues and physical inability, or psychological inability to stay in a standby queue for an attraction, like a 2-hour line, right? If somebody is incapable of doing that for whatever reason, Disney's got this program that you can sign up for, and instead of waiting in the line, effectively now it's adjudicated through the app. I believe that you used to have to go to the front and talk to a cast member about this. A cast member is Disney EU's for employee. And if the current wait is X minutes, you would sort of have a virtual wait where it's like, okay, X minutes from now you can return, you can use the fast lane to go straight to the line. But now it's like all in an app. In the Disney app. And post-COVID, post-reopening, when the free Fast Pass system was replaced with the turns out to be incredibly lucrative Genie Plus and individual Lightning Lane system of now everyone has to pay to use the fast lane, either by paying for the, what could be $25, $30 per day per guest to have the Genie Plus lottery where you can pick out certain attractions throughout the day, or to pay on a per a la carte basis for like the really, really most popular rides, the individual Lightning Lane. And that was a COVID era innovation under the Bob Chapek regime of Disney World. But that's generating now gobs and gobs of money. And there's good and there's bad. I mean, like the one silver lining of the fact that individual rides now generate individual, like, accountable revenue is that if Disney wants to build another $700 million attraction, like the Rise of the Resistance, the Star Wars ride is sort of like their marquee attraction right now. And it's like a 3-parter. It's insane. It's amazing. Strongly recommend if you come to Disney World, you ride that attraction, but it costs hundreds of millions of dollars. And the only way that Disney previously had to justify the expense of doing a massive attraction was a sort of lick your thumb and stick it in the air kind of sensation of whether or not it makes more people come to the parks, buy park tickets and show up, which is really indirect. There's all sorts of, especially in the post-COVID era, like weird external, it's no longer the predictable seasonal business that it was. And so having such an indirect feedback loop to justify a massive budget means that each of these feels like a really big bet. But now that they have data saying, hey, this many people are paying for individual access to this ride every single day, if that's whatever it is, call it 50, 70, 80, $90 million a year just for one attraction, suddenly, hey, even regardless of the effect that this attraction has overall in park attendance, and the capacity that it consumes by being fully occupied. It's generating like cash money dollars on top of that. And so I suspect what this means is that Disney is going to get more aggressive about what are, the fancier attractions. So that's one nice thing about it. But like downside is it costs a goddamn arm and a leg to come to Disney World anymore. And like the whalification of so many industries, like we've talked about with whether it's mobile games or freemium, or even now these live service games, right? Where like 90% of the money they make is off of the 1% of people who buy all of the skins. Disney has become overly indexed on high revenue guests who will buy all of the merchandise, who will pay for all of these perks and what do they call them? There's this euphemism for upsells called an enchanting extra. So like, now I don't want to just go to the fireworks show. I want to go to the fireworks show and have a dessert party on a special terrace with a dedicated viewing area. And all these are great experiences, don't get me wrong. But like it optimizes for guests with more money and to come and have repeat experiences, as opposed to what Disney World used to be, which is like 75% of America at one point had been to Disney World. Like Disney's very comfortable with that number of overall percentage of human Americans and international guests going way down if the average revenue per repeat guest goes way up, which is I think a medium-term fine, long-term disastrous strategy because, generations of people aren't going to have the nostalgia that others do about the parks. Anyway, that's the sort of state of affairs, right? The fast pass lane now, called Lightning Lane, is like far less accessible, as in cheap, to park guests. You have to pay a premium on top of your $250 ticket to get in it. Otherwise, you have to stand in line the whole time. Another trend post-COVID is the vertical short form video of, whether it's outrage bait or pro tips or like the Disney like adjacent social media world. I am very grateful that I do not consume any of it or interact with it, but it seems bonkers because there's just a whole bunch of Disney adults talking to each other about, each and every little sort of thing about the park. And if you're just talking about like, hey, this new cupcake is really cool, that's fine. But a trend started a couple years ago to be like, hey, like you're already paying so much money. Like if you've got anything that qualifies as a disability or sounds like a disability, like, anxiety, Disney, according to the ADA, can't, just ask for a doctor's note or a prescription. So TikTokers would brag about, hey, we're going to use the DAS service as basically free Lightning Lane. And I saw a couple of these videos. They were forwarded to me. I had discussions with people like in the line on one occasion, asking them about like the service, because like I think the terminal, something got said in the process that made it clear that that's what they were there for. And they were like, yeah, it's just like, I'm anxious or whatever, or my back's not very good, or I just don't like standing in lines or whatever. And so I signed up and there were people who are like literally going to the guest relations person for the interview to qualify for enrollment, reading from a script of, if you just say these kind of vagary statements, Disney won't say no, and you'll get this special accommodation. Now, coincident to that, another trend in the last 3, 4, 5 years, especially post-COVID, whether we're talking about long COVID or we're just talking about, accessibility generally or an understanding of disability, is like certain disability activists will tell you that like 50%, 60% of America has a disability. And they do that in part to raise awareness of how important, accessibility is for everybody. But if you've got a system where everyone's got to like wait in line to get in an attraction, and 60% of America has a plausible claim that they're disabled, then what you really have is a fast lane that 60% of America can go through, and then a slow lane that gets so slow because the fast lane never empties, right? Like it'll always be jam packed with people. And so what I had experienced over the last couple of years going to the parks is that there's so many people in the Lightning Lane, presumably on the DAS accessibility service program, that the standby line would if the Lightning Lane is full. I realize this is now we're getting into like park operations stuff. And I only know this because I'm in the parks a lot. So you're able to pick up on patterns. And now I know enough people that I can talk about it more intelligently. If you're the cast member who has to kind of be the human router between fast lane and slow lane towards the end of the queue, where those two queues conjoin into whatever pre-show element before the attraction starts. If you're that human router, they have these cards that say, like, based on the busyness currently, you can let in 99 people from the Lightning Lane for every one person from the standby queue, right? Whereas normally maybe the ratio is usually not nearly that extreme, but if the Lightning Lane is really, really backed up, that's like, we're just basically going to like only feed Lightning Lane. And this was all designed for the Lightning Lane to maybe be 10-15% of the total traffic on the ride. But my friend Len, who has a fabulous podcast called The Disney Dish, he had his sister Chrissy stand in front of like the Haunted Mansion attraction at Magic Kingdom and count how many people were going through the two lanes. And she counted in inside of an hour, 1,500 people going into each. 1,500 in the standby queue, 1,500 in the fast lane. And separately, they had an intelligence that the amount of Genie Plus Lightning Lane capacity for that attraction was only 300. So that meant like 1,200 of the 1,500 were presumably on the DAS program. And when you do the math, it's sort of like the fluid dynamics of like how this ratio works, because like these are not two lanes treated equally in terms of the line management. The standby queues wouldn't go up just linearly. The standby queue like wait times you could see like something like that happen, go from what would have been a 30-minute wait becomes a 90-minute wait now because the Lightning Lane is never actually emptied. So from an operations perspective, this was like quite bad. And at the same time, Disney legal, I'm sure, doesn't want to get sued for turning away anybody who's got a legitimate disability. In fact, me just using the phrase legitimate disability is itself a highly politically charged statement. And they didn't really know what to do, is my take. But they've nevertheless figured it out, probably, documented a lot of abuse in the system and are tweaking aspects of the program to curb this abuse while still making the program and its enrollment accessible to anybody who truly needs it. And again, the word truly now is like supercharged, right? Because like whenever you're talking about a scarce resource, like capacity in a popular attraction, there's going to be winners and losers. Somebody's going to fall on one side of the line where Disney's not going to, or Disney, who is now hiring, what part of this, they're hiring a third party to make all of these determinations so that their poor employees aren't individually on the hook for getting canceled. So you got to interview with one of them now. They may ask you to furnish additional documentation. I don't know exactly like how strict it's going to be, but I've heard through the grapevine that like their goal is to get this way, way down. And it'll be interesting to see how that works, because as somebody who's like a local, even when you pay for the fast pass lane, like it's not been particularly fast. The abuse in the system has been really, really, really evident to anyone who spends a lot of time in the parks. And what it does is just creates a logjam around all of the popular attractions. So everyone's having a bad time. The people who are spending a lot of money are having a bad time because they're spending a lot of money. The people who are, in the standby queue and seeing the wait times double versus what they would because of how they manage this, they're having a bad time. Anyway, that's a bit of news. It's news that I can use, because it'll be interesting to see. I think we're already even though this doesn't go into effect until May 20th here in Disney World, in advance of there's a new Tiana Princess and the Frog themed redo of Splash Mountain coming out in June. This doesn't go into effect on May 20th. It's already had, I think they've implemented certain aspects recently. Certain little changes like having DAS participants kind of go into like yet a third queue to kind of be triaged separately from like the guests who are paying for the Lightning Lane access. It'll be this sort of stuff just, it fascinates me because as like somebody who's interested in systems thinking and thinking about crowd management as a fluid dynamics problem, and like the just tremendous, like maybe I'm just attracted to extremely thorny trade-offs where there's not possibly a single right answer. There's just the lesser of multiple bad answers. It'll be really interesting to see how this plays out. So hopefully it results in a better experience for more people. Interesting. Come down to the theme park and tell me how it goes. And maybe hang out with me if you are not too weird. Another bit of news, we talked about the Vision Pro and the personas and how they're not very good. Basically, if you're not familiar with Vision Pro, you can scan your face and it creates a shitty video game NPC character of you because it is 3D generating you onto a mesh, right? So that when you're in a FaceTime call, or Zoom supports this and all the meeting apps support this now, because you've got a dingus strapped to your head, instead people see your 3D generated self. And it's gotten incrementally better with the 1.1 update. It was a little bit more accurate. Now the latest 1.1 beta, Apple flipped a switch on the server side so that if you've got a recent scan of your face, your persona can now be made spatial. You check an extra box, and instead of being in a rectangle, your persona, your 3D generated self will appear to whoever you're speaking with as like a ghost, as a fully three-dimensional, like a face and shoulders and sort of just fuzzy at the outlines, ghostiness around the back of the head. You have hands. So I decided to play with my spatial persona with my buddy Aaron. And so Aaron, there's a picture up on the website, some screenshots that I took. So Aaron and I, we started the call. We were spatial. We tried to figure, he was higher than me because I was seated on like a low couch, and you can move each other around. And when you move it, it sort of pauses their persona so that you're oriented in a way that you can speak, which is very weird and a little bit glitchy, but there's no way to like raise or lower someone. So like if I'm in a chair and he's standing up or vice versa, one of us is just way taller than the other. And that's fine because that's sort of realistic. But it was very awkward at first because I was clearly sitting in a lower chair than him, and the system knew it. And so the system accommodated that. But I couldn't see where he was because we were just, each in our own spaces. Then I decided like, hey, let's, we can move our hands. We can point at things. Let's try to play patty cake. So that was the first thing that came to mind. So we do a patty cake, and like that much works, right? So like we're in rhythm, we're in sync. That means for that to work, it means it's low latency. The patty cake test, right? It's a classic test of three-dimensional virtual reality chat programs. Then I decided let's try share play, the thing where you could like watch a movie side by side, even though you're remote. So first we tried it with the Alicia Keys immersive video. This is like a 180 degree globe video where you're kind of like in the show. Share play works with that, like as in it'll play simultaneously, but you can't see your compatriot because I believe because the video is dead centered around you. So I got out of that, and then we went and started Napoleon, the Ridley Scott film with Joaquin Phoenix. That's an Apple TV exclusive. And I scrubbed halfway through the movie and positioned the video as a rectangle in space. And then Aaron was on my side, on my right, and he and I could both see the movie, and we both had a good view of the movie. But we could also see each other, turn to each other, and our reactions. We could read each other's reactions. And of course, we're speaking to each other while the movie plays. It did a really good job of audio ducking for that. It felt very much like we're on a couch together and we're watching a movie. And then I flicked on the immersive mode in the Apple TV, app, which has an immersive mode where you're kind of in a theater, and you, instead of being able to place yourself with fine-grained precision, you can say, I want to be in the balcony or on the floor, and I can be in the front, back, or middle. So there's 6 positions that you can move yourself to in this immersive theater. And when we were in that theater, we could also see each other. So I thought that was a pretty cool, way different, if they had shipped with this, I think reviews of these personas would be significantly different. I think reviews of this apps or of this platform's, the degree to which it's antisocial would have been less emphasized in a lot of the reviews, because in fact, if you're in a long distance relationship or if you just got a friend from far away and you both like the same thing, each watching this in this platform is, and this is no news if you have ever used any of the other VR headsets, because like Big Screen is a popular app that accomplishes this. It's the same thing. It's like a VR chat, but like, you can play a Plex server or whatever. Difference here is like, this is built into all of the major streaming platforms, and it's all share play, and it's just a FaceTime call, and it is higher fidelity, and it's a much nicer headset than any of those other headsets. So that was all really, really neat. And we decided to cap it off by playing a game of Battleship. There's a VR app called Game Room with genericized versions of popular board games, and one was Battleship. It was called Battle or something. And it was a legit, if you're not familiar with Battleship, I'm not going to explain it because whatever the fuck, but like, you put boats down and the other person can't see where you put your boats. And then you target little points on a grid to try to hit their boats. And it's just a guessing game. And there's like a mild amount of strategy to it, but like this game has like 3D graphics, and you see the missiles flying around, and like the ships have like literally, they're floating in water and then they sink. It's very cute. And to do it across from Aaron's persona, where I could see him and his hands, and I could see him get fucking pissed when I nailed his battleship, And I was sitting at a table, and like the game table in that game feels like a table, so it lends itself to you sitting at a real table, and it felt very convincing. It felt like, wow, for a first, this is the, I keep telling myself, this is the absolute worst that this will ever be. And it's pretty good. The problem, of course, the 2 big problems. One is that there's not a lot of experiences available like this. You're only going to want to play Battleship so many times before you get sick of it. And for me, that time might be 1 time. It was still very cool. And 2, not a lot of people have this thing yet. So it's another network effect problem. So when a lot of people have these, and there are a lot more experiences, I think it's low friction enough as it is, but I think it'll even become lower friction. It's a little bit fussy in terms of getting the sharing to work. But if you're determined, it does. Another thing from the sort of Apple sphere, got a couple of them today. John Gruber at Daring Fireball shared this post on Threads. And it was presumably from a web developer. He said, I was wondering why I haven't seen websites utilizing the vibration API when I see more and more apps using it, including Arc Search and AirChat. Safari doesn't even support it, so there it goes, with a melting face emoji. I think, so Gruber's commentary is that like, this is broken thinking because web developers think that progressive web apps specifically, but websites generally, should have access to all of the same hardware APIs that native applications do. And Google promulgates this because the web is their first platform and Android is a secondary platform. So Google with Blink, Chrome's rendering engine, and with Chromium, they've been very aggressive in pushing as many hardware features as possible into the web layer so that, the web as their platform could be enhanced. Whereas Apple doesn't tend to think about it that way, right? Apple is all about apps. It's where they make money. They don't make money when you have a progressive web app because they don't have to stand in the middle. So they don't have nearly the incentive to expose so much hardware features. So the 2 are kind of at odds, and both of their incentives inform probably everything that they do about whether or not they make a progressive web app API, like whether in this case, the vibration API, so one could take that to mean, website causes vibration, either because you click a thing or because a thing happens on the page. Probably most used for gaming, but in this case, clearly also for like, typing and typing indicators and that sort of thing in a messaging app. Gruber's point is like, I don't want a website to vibrate ever, ever, ever. And it shouldn't be allowed. And I don't even want to have a permissions dialog asking me if I want it to vibrate. And I agree, websites should mostly be websites, but I've also made a lot of web apps and a lot of web apps that would benefit from greater access to the hardware. And Apple has very often taken away web APIs, like the gyroscopic one. Like it used to be that you could have the website would read the gyroscopic positioning of the phone. What angle is it being held at? But then it turned out that like advertising tracking could be used to triangulate how a person was holding a phone over multiple websites to target the individual. So then Apple nixed the ability to tell what angle is a phone being held in. So that's an example of like advertising and privacy features from Apple's perspective trumping the raw functionality of being able to measure, in JavaScript in a website, when a person's rotating their phone, right? And the reason it's cool for me is like, I would love to be able to build parallax effects so that like on my website, which is like a layered website and components are supposed to live beneath the page and have a certain depth to them. I would love to be able to do a parallax effect where as you tilted the phone, that beneath the page effect was impacted, right? This case of like vibration, like who's to say if vibration on a website is good or bad? But my feeling on it is Apple has in many cases actually already shown a really cool way to segregate a website from a web app. And they did it in iPhone OS 1.0. If you're at a website and you want to come back to it and you want to think that it's an app, you click the share button and then you go to add to home screen and you add it to the home screen. And that has always been, from Apple's perspective, like a privileged version of the web app, of the website, where eventually they added a lot of the standardized progressive web app or PWA features, like specifying a manifest or a meta tag or service workers for background tasks to get more and more like you're an app. And a lot of those features, like being able to take over the whole screen with no browser Chrome, those are only available if you tell the user to add them to the home screen. And if they add to the home screen, then you have all these additional tools in your toolbox. So my thinking on this is I would love for Apple to support, say, the vibration API or any of these APIs and just gate them behind that same mechanic. Because I think the issue that Gruber's alluding to is if I'm in Safari and then my phone starts buzzing because I'm on some stupid fucking website, yes, that sucks. But if I like that website enough or that web application enough that I want to add it to my home screen, then I think the defaults should flip. If it's on the home screen and people are clicking it and it's opening an app-like window, then have all of the app-like hardware access just turned on to the same extent that a native app would. Now, that's the idealistic view. Of course, like I said, Apple has incentives that run counter to doing it that way. But as a commentator, I have to disagree that like all of these web APIs are inherently bad by default. I think they're bad by default for websites when viewed through a browser, but I would feel much more neutrally about them, or I'd feel the same about them as I would about a native application, in this case, vibration being the one that I'm thinking about. If somebody's already gone through that 3-step process of share button, add to home screen, save. If they've done that, they are opting into treating it like an app. Which brings us to the news item that the pun was inspired by. If you play video games and you have an iPhone, you may have felt frustrated at certain times over the years that your phone was far more powerful than any other portable computing device, had a brighter screen, had a nicer, higher resolution screen. It has most importantly of all, it's the device that you have with you when you're out of the house, and yet is absolute shit for playing real games. And of course, discussion of mobile gaming and how it's been captured by, a business model that treats it more like a digital casino hacking people's, dopamine pathways than something akin to the console video game industry, has resulted in just a complete dearth of games worth playing. And the touchscreen, I think, lends itself to games that are less engaging than games that use a traditional controller. And part of it's a generational thing, because you see young people using those virtual analog sticks and tapping glass with no haptic feedback whatsoever on buttons over and over again. But they're even devices like the Backbone One that you can just snap onto an iPhone, and it's like a traditional, dual stick modern game controller. It's just there's nothing to play on an iPhone. And it's one reason why the news back in February that Apple was going to open up game streaming apps. So presumably Xbox Game Pass could release a native application, not just a web application where you could play your whole Xbox catalog, but that requires streaming fast internet. At the end of the day, this device has tons of storage, tons of performance overhead, or headroom. We should just be able to play normal ass fucking video games on our fucking phones. It is the number one reason I've convinced myself over the years. Number one reason that I was going to say men in America, because it's mostly men probably, for reasons that don't have time to talk about sexism in marketing at Radio Shack in the 80s, but the number one reason that people would jailbreak their phones was to be able to put emulators on their phones. And I am, not to say I've had secret conversations with little birdies at Apple. There is data to suggest that emulators are the number one reasons that people would try to escape the App Store and the lockdown and instead jailbreak. And that was subsided somewhat. I think the reason that Apple had such a generous sideloading policy of even with a free developer account, you can put any code you want onto onto your phone if you're dedicated enough. Now using Xcode or using, there's Sideloadly and Alt Store are other ways to do these installs, and they just come with onerous restrictions where a 7-day expiry on those apps. So if you're really dedicated and you want to have RetroArch, which is a meta emulator for almost every platform, and you want to play that on your phone, you can do that without literally jailbreaking the phone, which Apple doesn't want you to do from a security and platform integrity perspective. Separately, now that the EU is requiring Apple to allow alternate app stores and to allow sideloading, Apple knew that emulators were far and away the most appealing reason that any, Tom, Dick, and Harry, or Harriet, would want to install an alternate app store. And then that's a slippery slope, right? It's you come in because you want to play Super Nintendo games on your phone. And then, while I'm here, I'll also download all the Spotify and this version of Instagram Reels that tracks the shit out of me and all of the apps. Once you've got a second app store on your phone, Apple's dominance from a market share perspective is threatened. So there was no law that Apple felt like it was following to ban emulators. They just chose to sidestep any sort of, liability of, look, people are using all this for piracy. It would have been bad PR. You probably would have had the traditional console makers, especially Nintendo, which is especially litigious around emulation. You would have had them in Apple's grid. And so they banned it for that reason. But it's now that it's imminent, and clear that alternate app stores like Alt Store were going to pop up just to be places for emulators, and that would probably drive tons and tons of adoption of alternate app stores in Europe. Apple changed their tune. They're suddenly worldwide change in policy. Emulators are allowed now. Cool. Thanks. Bye. And single-handedly, I think if anything that Apple does from a policy perspective that, kills the real world influence of this legislation in Europe, it's going to be the emulator thing. You know, being able to play, Apple calls them quote unquote retro game emulators, as if to signify that if your emulator can play current generation console games, they probably would not allow that because it would be too direct. There's no fair use argument even remotely possible for something that could only really be used to pirate modern games that are still for sale. But they turned it on, and I think it's going to be super duper effective at curbing the adoption of alternate app stores. And so weirdly, one of the only alternate app marketplace in Europe right now is AltStore, which is made by this guy named Riley Riley, to distribute his Delta game emulator that wasn't allowed in the App Store. So he goes through all that work, makes the alternate app store, brings it to bear in Europe and launches it there. And then the next day Apple's like, oh, by the way, emulators can go in the App Store. And so then one of his older emulators, which was GPL'd, but with a custom license, that went up first, and he got that taken down because it was against the license to put in the App Store. And then now here he is putting his Delta app in the proper App Store outside of the EU. Like, boy, that kid who was only like in high school when he made the first one, he's been on a journey. So yeah, Apple's emulators in the App Store. That's the short of it. News. If you want to play Mario, you can download an app that will let you play Mario if you can just bring your own copy. Because the apps themselves are not allowed to distribute any of the copyrighted games. You have to be, and you look at the screenshots of these things, and the screenshots are all custom ROMs of games that don't exist, of like fan-made games like Castle Quest, right? Because if you were to put a screenshot of a real game, that would be a pretty obvious nod to the fact that these are really used for piracy, and also on their face, probably a copyright violation. So that's funny. I will download these emulators because I have been installing RetroArch and so forth from Xcode with my paid developer account, and those can last for like, I think, a year. It'd be really nice if somebody were to build a nice emulator with, like, say, God forbid, iCloud sync of save states and save games. So personally, this is an example of regulation and threat of regulation causing them to loosen up in a way that materially impacts me and my interests, which, as we all know, are the most important interests to me. So if you like retro games, go download Delta in the App Store. It's fine. I hope somebody does a RetroArch port soon. I thought about doing it and doing a build and just pushing it out, but I didn't want to bother reading all the close, like, licensing nonsense. But I'll do it if I have to, because I don't know what else to use all of the incredible GPU power in my phone for, because God knows our phones are just intensely overpowered. But if you'd rather have a phone that was not intensely overpowered, might I suggest you check out the Humane AI pin. So Humane is a company that was founded by a couple disgruntled and former Apple product managers. If I remember right. All I remember about them, I don't remember their names, just a couple of reports that they were glory hogs at Apple and tended to take credit for stuff way outside their remit. And I wouldn't know if that's true, but I would say that the way that they talk about their company at TED and in public and in media tracks, because they act like a company designed to maximize investment dollars with highfalutin, hyperbolic, slimily ambitious, and far-reaching hyperbole about their vision for how they're going to just change the world. And the product itself sucks, by the way. Spoiler alert. The product is so bad that, like, Marquez Brownlee, MKBHD on YouTube, was like, this is very bad. And he just came out and said it. But he's like the nice guy on the internet, and he's fun, and he always finds the positive in everything. And he has 30 phones, and each of them are like his children, and he loves them all in his own way. For him to come out and just start a video and be like, this thing hot garbage, it actually like triggered a backlash by other people on the internet being like, how dare you? You're going to destroy these companies. You're going to destroy these businesses. Like he serves his readers or his listeners or I'm sorry, his viewers on the video machine. If the product's bad, it's okay for the product to be bad. Like a certain number of products, every year a product comes out and that will be the worst product that somebody made this year. And the goal of the game is to not be the one to ship that fucking product. Now there's lots of ways to win that game. One way is you've got a product and it's in contention for worst product of the year. A solution might be don't ship it. Another solution might be don't seed review copies of it to reviewers. If you know it's bad, just ship it quietly to the people who pre-ordered it. Another solution might be don't talk in such lofty language about how it's going to change the world or make it out to be more excellent than it is. When I reviewed the Vision Pro, I spent 2 hours beating the shit out of it because what Apple says it is based on a vision of the future, and it is not there yet. At the same time, even though a lot of people who listened to that said, whoa, that was like an epic takedown, somebody said on one comment of the Vision Pro, no, it wasn't. It was just like a recitation of all the ways this thing fails to live up to the marketing hype that Apple put out there. It set the expectations high and it under-delivered. Because I'm still using my Vision Pro 5, 6, 7 hours a day. And judging by the internet, I'm the only person still using my Vision Pro a few months later because I know what it is. It's a Mac virtual display with some extra, I don't know. What would you call them? Like extra little toys, like a little music player and stuff. It's really just a great way to use a computer. It's a great monitor with a lot of extra features. That's all I see it as. And if Apple had sold it as that, people would be like, this really is a great monitor. If Apple had sold it as just like, this is a really fancy TV for watching streaming video, which is kind of where they ultimately landed in terms of like what the people at the Apple Store will tell you to use it for. But overall, their vision of the future, like they couldn't help themselves but say, this is where we're going for the next 5 to 10 years. And they wanted to give people that notion of long-term, here's the end game. And we're going to pitch it with this product that can show flashes of that brilliance. But in everyday life, it's just not there yet. And Apple can do that because they got a whole bunch of other products. They make money in a whole bunch of other ways. And they can credibly show up and innovate and incrementally improve. Like, I think investors who saw that video were like, yes, so this is what Apple's going to be doing post iPhone. They might feel a little bit reassured by that, like the first initial Vision Pro reveal. I think that the fans understand where it's going. I think developers should have an idea of, if they don't, they don't know how to listen to Apple, of like where Apple's going with the product. This Humane thing is all the same sizzle. It's all the same big talk, overhyping of expectations, but none of the stake. Not Vision Pro is 20% less good than Apple said it would be at the things that Apple said it would be good at. And that is a scandal by Apple terms, because typically they underpromise and overdeliver in a lot of ways. Humane ships a little rectangle with a battery pin backed magnet, and you stick it on your chest and you press and hold a touchscreen surface, and it's got a camera, and you could say, you can take pictures and videos and stuff, but you mostly, it's an interface to ChatGPT, and you can ask it questions. What am I looking at? Is this healthy? Why is the sky blue? And then you can wait for 10 to 15 seconds and it'll say something. It's got a round trip to do the speech text It's got to, round trip, talk to the AI servers. It's got to do all of this with like a low bandwidth T-Mobile SIM that is on board and the mandatory cellular connection that you have to pay for. I don't need to be the next, like I haven't used it, but like The Verge's review is also very good. A good video of like what it's like to use this thing. It's bad. You should watch it just to remind yourself of like, this is what a bad product looks like. And if you ship a bad product that's ambitious, that just sucks, that fails, that flops, I don't think you should feel bad. I mean, like, look at Palm. Palm did that left and right. But because of the ambition, because of the focus, like, I think people look back on that stuff with nostalgia. There was still utility there. There was like, I think you do get points for trying. But man, like, the Humane marketing people are just some of the most unlikable motherfuckers that I've ever seen. It's such a, like, the way that you comport yourself as a media person, whether that's the founders talking, it's mostly the founders, or whether it's like lead investors, or whether it's the PR people who, by the way, have all quit working at Humane post-launch, which is usually not a good sign. The pitch with Humane was people hate their phones. So this is going to be a way where you can buy our device, which is a phone, and escape your phone. And a lot of commentary has revolved around that statement. Do people hate their phones? They sure seem fucking addicted to their phones. And I think that it underplayed, like, there's a kernel of truth to what Humane is saying, that people hate certain aspects of their phones. They hate that they're addicted to them, even if they're addicted. Most people do. Becky and I, when you come into the Searles household, we are pretty diligent. We have a little credenza near the entrance, and we put our phones on the MagSafe charger as if we're checking them in, like as if they're guns at a nightclub, and we're checking them at the coat check because they are dangerous. And if we had them in the house, years of experience has told us, we'll just get sucked in doing nonsense bullshit. But if we check the phones at the door and we come in and we want to read an article, we'll find a better tool for the job, like an iPad or a newspaper or read a paper book or whatever. And if we need to do real serious computing, we've got real serious computers for that. We just don't end up in this sort of timeline scrolling hellscape because we don't bring our phones in. And when we're out together too, we tend not to spend any time looking at our phones unless the other person goes away. Like, bathroom breaks are pretty much the only time I check to see if I have any messages. And it's a great way to live. It took us a long time to develop the habits that we needed to be able to be so present in our daily life. It takes a lot of tools. It takes a lot of nonsense. Like, I built an iPad mini I wasn't using. And so I set it up for Becky with like a fake iCloud account, basically, in our iCloud family. They'll like, would just be like a completely disconnected, not iMessageable, like iPad just for the productive things that she wanted to do every day with no opportunity for distraction. And I've got my iPad Pro now, and I did the same thing to that. It's reset as my Japanese Apple ID, which has like nothing. And so basically all I can use it for is adding to-dos to things and streaming video at night. And I can't get sucked into a bunch of conversations, much less social media. So I am probably the closest to the person that Humane has in mind of like, relatively affluent, tech forward people who've realized that the psychological impact of being on your smartphone all day is bad for you. And wouldn't it be great to be able to go and be in the world and not have your phone? The problem is they made a bad device. The battery sucks. You have to pay a subscription. It's expensive. It's slow. It's unreliable. By any metric, it's not very good. The camera is facing down. Like, It's a potato cam. Like it drags your shirt down, like it probably doesn't work if you've got long hair. That's going to obscure the camera. It overheats all the time, even though it's white. It overheats all the time. And like, I know these are people like reviewing the thing in New York or the Bay Area, and it's overheating. Like, it would not handle the Florida sun for more than a minute. So it's a bad product, and that's the problem. But also, like, the other problem is I wrote a blog post about phone-free field trips like 8 years ago, about like just like not taking my phone with me for a walk or for a day in the city, and instead just using an Apple Watch. And modern, like I have an Apple Watch Ultra 2 on. It's got a cellular subscription as well, which costs less per month than the Humane $22 subscription. I think I pay $10 a month for it, right? And I can press and hold, and I can ask Siri anything, just like it could ask ChatGPT anything. And the only difference is that Siri is worse than ChatGPT. But like, the watch also has a screen, not a screen for getting distracted or getting sucked in, but a screen that can show you like a basic map or can show you directions, right? The watch is just a way better form factor for what they're trying to accomplish. And when we're going to see WWDC in early June, everyone expects that Apple's going to make a hard push into on-device AI features. And I don't think that they're going to have a chatbot necessarily. I think that they're going to probably go out of their way in any APIs that they publish to like set policies saying, don't just use our shit to make a chatbot. It's got to be more purpose built for whatever your app does to enhance what the app does. But the one place where they may bend on that is on the watch, because having an assistant on the watch that is more intelligent, that can accomplish more things and answer more meaningful questions is truly a liberating capability that you could totally imagine if Siri just fucking worked and could carry a conversation and could like handle multimodal, not even multimodal, just like multi-step conversations or instructions. Then I could totally imagine accomplishing way, way more from the watch. And not just like, right now the watch is hobbled both by how bad Siri is, but also like a lot of things would be that are not the watch is not literally capable of in the stock apps that are on it, is because building UI around that when you only have space on the screen for like 3 or 4 buttons is just really, really hard. But if the assistant was way more able to act as an agent on your behalf, then I think what we'll start to see is you press and hold the crown, or you talk to the phone, you talk to the watch, and the assistant's able to do more things as an agent on your behalf. I think what we'll start to see is Apple, and hopefully third parties, but really, let's be serious, just Apple, will start to push more of their stock apps functionality into the watch so that the processor and the system can do those things on your behalf. Like, for example, right now the Notes app is completely absent on the watch. But there's no reason that it should be. And the reason it's not is because like typing with the keyboard is really shitty and navigating that is really shitty. And like, but if half the things that you'd want to do with an agent have to do with like, appending to a note or like, go and research this for me and then create a note about it for me. Right. Like then I could see like suddenly, even without the screen getting bigger or the user interface getting to be much more sophisticated, you would actually see more features from third-party apps or from apps, like more depth in the functionality available if only the assistant worked. And what would enable that is like an LLM that can run on device. Because if the processor is fast enough for the LLM to run, the large language model to run on the device, then that means you don't need a network hop we already have on-device dictation and with the S9 chip, the latest version of the watch chip. Since device can dictate locally, if it can run a language model locally, it can start to solve some problems locally. And when it does have to go to the cloud, it can just sip only the data that it needs to accomplish the task. So that's a totally different ballgame than the Humane AI pin, where even just to understand what you just said, it has to go and stream all that audio up to the cloud, get the transcript, probably it's on one big server loop of then the server has to go back to OpenAI and ask it to do its thing. And then it round trips back to you, which is how it all takes 12 seconds to do anything. But more than just the seconds is the battery impact, because Humane, their AI pin, they have a cellular connection. Everything happens over that cellular connection. And cellular connections, if you've ever done any Apple Watch heavy use, there's 3 ways that the watch can get network access. And the most expensive by far from a battery consumption perspective is cellular. To talk to a cell tower is very, very expensive. It will try hard to not, to the point of it's mostly offline most of the time. The second most expensive is Wi-Fi. So for a watch to connect to Wi-Fi, it is a comparatively violent activity of radios having to tune to get packets across the air. The way that the Apple Watch is designed to maximize its throughput for network activity is actually low energy Bluetooth connection to your phone. And so because it's got this special pipe, wireless pipe between the watch and the phone, it has this privileged networking access where it can get, now the Bluetooth, the Wi-Fi is faster, but it just burns the battery way faster. The Bluetooth low energy data connection between the watch and the phone is a proprietary data access tunnel that is just super low energy. Does not drain the battery much at all. Means it can just happen in the background, refresh all the time, and you can still get that great all-day battery life with your Apple Watch. All day in scare quotes, unless it's the Ultra, which then it really is all day. For a relatively small form factor that doesn't get hot, that doesn't overheat, like it would if it had to call the cellular tower for every single little thing. Well, why doesn't the Humane AI pin just do that? Well, the answer, of course, is they don't have a phone platform. Because something's got to be the heavy brick in your pocket with a bigger battery that can handle all of the cellular connectivity on your behalf. And Humane's not going to sell one of those because there's not room enough in the market for a third phone platform. You know, Amazon tried, they failed with the Fire phone. Meta tried for a minute, they failed, they got out. It's really just these two. So the DOJ lawsuit against Apple that I discussed, I think in version 9, I think that was the most recent one. I said that the one thing that they should have focused on was the Apple Watch instead of these 10 other reasons, these 5 different areas where, you know, if you squint the right way, technically Apple has a dominant position in the market. And so therefore all of these other rules should apply to them. The one thing that I thought they should have focused on was Apple Watch, because they've got absolutely a lock, stock, and barrel revenue monopoly on wearable computers. And in that market, Humane's AI pin would fall in. It's a competitor in the same market as the Apple Watch. And what did Apple do to privilege the Apple Watch so as to box out competition? There's too much of a focus, in my opinion, in the DOJ complaint about like the apps and like the ability to like reply to a message, a notification on your phone directly from the wearable. Instead, you have to go back to the phone. Whereas the Apple Watch has the smart reply feature that's built into the APNS, the Apple push notification service. What they should have focused on, from my perspective, is strictly that Bluetooth low energy data tunnel. Because if you opened that up, if you could say, hey, all users of the Humane AI pin, you can access either the piggybacked Wi-Fi or the BTLE connection to the phone, just like the Apple Watch could. Then you could equip, from a market competition perspective, the same size battery instead of a much larger one, or like multiple replacements for the battery every couple hours, which is what they actually ended up having to ship. And it seems to me that infrastructure level of this is just a networking stack, and the networking stack on the phone could be made open to competing wearable devices, just like it's available to the Apple Watch, without getting in anything higher order, without having to like worry about app stores or interoperability at the application layer. which is what everyone seems to be obsessed about. Like, I think this could have been just such a narrowly focused and slam dunk case. Hell, I think this could be narrowly focused and slam dunk legislation. If only you could get Congress to pay attention to something that's this boring for 5 minutes. Of what we should be doing is just telling Apple that, like, this connection that you have, this Bluetooth Low Energy thing that the Pebble didn't have access to, and that the Google and the Samsung Gear stuff doesn't have access to, which is why those have to be so fucking ginormous. You need to open up the access to that, like, networking infrastructure, and then, like, you know, have some, I don't know, how many other places they have, like, type in this key code and then you can access the Apple TV on AirPlay or whatever. Just do something like that to pair the devices. And then from that point on, Apple's responsibility from a security and privacy perspective just needs to be make sure it's not using so much data that, like, the phone's dying, or surface that to the user in a way. Whereas, like, all these other solutions that do exist up in the application layer, it's like, what are we going to do? Like, create a third-party API for third-party devices who do have a totally divorced way to get onto the network, to do smart replies and those extra actions, you know, like turn on, turn off, or whatever for these notifications. That's so much more work. And it to beyond a certain point, it doesn't make sense. And it definitely undercuts the whole, like, you know, the reason to be in an ecosystem. So anyway, I think the Humane AI pin is the perfect exhibit A of the evidence that the Department of Justice could use in the lawsuit that I think would make way more sense. But, you know, there's a reason I didn't become a lawyer. Because if I'd been living in the moment every day, I definitely would not have wanted to continue to read law books. And I, for whatever reason, when I was picking out my career, I was looking at it. I was like, should I go into IP law? And then I had a friend whose dad was an intellectual property lawyer. And he's like, my family hates my dad. My mom hates my dad. I hate my dad. My dad hates my dad. And he is an IP lawyer. And that job sucked all of the life out of him. So I don't think you should be an IP lawyer. And so then I decided not to be an IP lawyer. Anyway, all that to say, because that's not the lawsuit that Apple got, I think the Watch X, the Watch 10, if they come out with like a redesign for the watch and they do have another coming out party, similar to the iPhone 10 was, for the biggest refresh in iPhone history, I suspect if that happens this year with the 10th Apple Watch series, it's going to leverage this special network connection, as well as Apple Silicon that can do on-device LLM stuff. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of competitive advantage just in that silicon. It would deliver on the promise to a large extent of what Humane's actually promising, of, like, you know, like, this is the thing that's going to free people from their phones. And I'm here for it. And I hope they do that. And I hope that Apple's not scared off on continuing to integrate all of their devices. I don't think that they will be, especially like this short notice, right? Like 6 months from now, like all of whatever this next watch is going to be that cake has been baked for probably 18 months at this point. But weirdly, this Humane AI pin disaster of being maybe the worst product with a high profile to be released in years has me so excited for the next Apple Watch, because it's selling a vision that Apple could actually deliver. The thing that's sad about it is only Apple could ever deliver it because of the dominance in the phone, because the only way to have a wearable that is efficient from a battery and networking perspective is to have a big buddy tethered to you within 30 feet that can do a lot of the can bear the brunt of the networking cost from a battery perspective. So that's it for the news. After we discuss the news, I like to, though we're in the cool down period of the workout, I like to share some recommendations, things that I've been enjoying. Got a new piece of hardware. I love getting new hardware in the house. one way to get new hardware in your house is to lose existing hardware and then be like, shit, what happened to that? I should buy another thing for that. So that happened. We had a Sonos Roam, one of those little Toblerone shaped speakers that cost too much money because Sonos are too expensive. So like $180 little speaker, but it's waterproof. You can put it in the shower. You can take it out of the shower. Whatever you play on it is going to sound tinny and shitty, but it's got nice industrial design. The Sonos app is really nice, and it has AirPlay 2. So we didn't use it a lot because it sounded like garbage. But we had one, and then we didn't have one. And one morning I was like, where'd that go? And Becky's like, I don't know. I think we lost it. So the Sonos Roam roamed away, and I thought about just buying another one, but I know it's due for a refresh, probably in June, according to the recent article I'd read. I was like, well, I'm not going to buy another one of these. And even then, it's kind of a mediocre product. And I saw that like the Sonos Move got a refresh late last year, the Move 2, which is also portable, but much less portable. And the Move 2, in addition to being a cool AirPlay 2 receiver, so it plays nicely in my AirPlay Apple home. It's stereo speakers, so like more tweetering inside the thing, and it's way bigger. And it only costs $450 fucking dollars for a Bluetooth speaker. That's, it's way overpriced. It's very hefty. It's not a little boy, and it's got a little handle. Sort of. It's got a concave area, and you could mount it to a wall if you're really ambitious. But for us, having it in the outdoor but enclosed lanai area of our porch, where I wouldn't want to put permanent speakers, like, it's perfect. And we can pick it up, and if we're in the pool, we can place it by the pool, and I can text my neighbor, hey Jonathan, I'm going to be playing music by the pool. If it's annoying, please yell at me. Because that's what good neighbors do. Good neighbors do not just play music all day and piss off their neighbors. But they do it, but they text first and say, hey, it's cool if you just tell me to buzz off. So anyway, I got a Sonos Move 2. First impression is twofold. One, it is reliable and works well and sounds fine. Cool. And two, it comes with this halo-shaped, sort of flimsy charging ringlet that you can set it on. And the ringlet has a prefixed attached USB-C cable coming off of it. And it comes with a power adapter. And I don't know what wattage that power adapter is, but it is fussy. I think it's like over 30 watts, but beneath 45 watts. Because weirdly, the adapter doesn't fit in our outdoor outlets. So I can't use it there. Because they're those waterproofed outlets, right? And it's just too wide. And if I were to put it behind a standoff or something, then I wouldn't be able to close the latch and it would no longer be a water resistant outlet. So I was like, well, I've got this whole bag of other power supplies from 10 to 45 to 60 watts that all would fit. And so I kept trying the little ringlet with the different power supplies, and it would just pause for a second, and then the ringlet itself would blink red with this LED that I'd never seen before. So it really only wants to use the power supply that God gave it. So that's a pain in the ass. So I'm looking at it right now because it's just sitting in my office. I'm like, well, what the fuck do I do with this? Very convenient inductive charging supply that this speaker should be plugged into. But instead, what I'm doing is there's also a USB-C port in the back of the speaker, and I'm just using that like a goddamn moron. So I'm mad about that because I'm like, this is one of the feature. This is a bullet point. This is bullet point number 7 out of 8 in a $450 speaker. And I'm trying to justify what I just spent $450 fucking dollars on this thing based on those 8 bullet points. And now here I am. One of those 8 bullet points is totally non-functional to me, and I feel like I should get back $40 because that's how that should work. Anyway, I'll share a link to the Verge review if you're in the market for an overpriced Bluetooth speaker. Other recommendation I just finished last night. I finished the season 1 of the Apple TV program Constellation, which if you look at it, it kind of looks like that movie Gravity. It's like brunette lady in space by herself. Except instead of Sandra Bullock, this is a different brunette lady. And having danger happen. And that indeed, the pilot is one of those. The pilot is, hey, look, danger happening in space on a space station. Will she survive? How will she MacGyver her way back to Earth? Maybe the first 2 episodes of the 8 are that. I won't spoil it for you, but I will say she's in all the episodes. This show, I think because I failed to pay attention to what it was in whatever trailer I watched before I watched it, what it seemed marketed as is like just another space show. And I'm always down for another space show. I love sci-fi, and Apple TV Plus is probably my favorite streaming service, and it seems really over-indexed on sci-fi shows, and I am here for that. But it turns out that this show, Constellation, is more of a psychological thriller with space as a backdrop and with science, quantum physics as like the main mechanic to deliver a psychological thriller than it is a space show or a sci-fi show. And in that sense, trying to think of, because I don't want to spoil it. In that sense, I felt baited and switched. And so I watched the finale last night, and it just felt like, man, like it opened so many different threads. It closed a few of them. I just it tried to tease a cliffhanger for what season 2 would be. I will be very interested to see if this gets renewed, because it is definitely on the bubble of worth it to watch. And I haven't followed, any news about like what thinking people think about Constellation or what the critics are saying, but it is so right on the bubble between mediocre and good. And there are flashes of brilliance in there. I can't tell if there's a story that they want to tell or if they're just creating another Lost where they're like, let's write a lot of checks and assume we'll never have to cash these. So anyway, check it out. If anything I said sounds interesting to you, then go nuts. Another show watching, I had my brother Jeremy and a couple of his friends over for a watch party for the first episode of Fallout. Amazon Prime Video, not content to have merely one good show in The Boys, they created the second one. It's called Upload, also very good. Fallout is the prestige show that I've only watched the first episode, but if you've played any of the games, like, man, that pilot was a dead ringer for what you'd want a Fallout show to be. And I'm very excited to keep going. Fallout is a post-apocalyptic retro future motif, but it has such a grim outlook on humanity while still working in like a not necessarily even dark humor, just humor. It feels they nailed the vibe for sure. And I think it's a universe that you could do a lot of interesting stuff in. So it's good to see that seems to be high quality. If you got any thoughts on Fallout, hit me up. I'd love to hear. No spoilers though. I'm taking my time with that one. It took me like almost a year to watch The Last of Us on HBO because like no one ever wanted to watch it with me. And so I'd only wait for like a night, similar to my podcasting. I'd wait until I was home alone with nothing better to do. And then I would watch an episode of The Last of Us, which I also loved. So it's just great to see video game adaptations that are actually good. But it makes sense that we're seeing them because if you're a video game maker, you can't make any goddamn money actually selling video games anymore. So you gotta find another revenue stream. And one of those is licensing your gaming IP to the video streamers who are still investing in new content. Another recommendation, I'm going to share a YouTube video with you. This YouTube video, if you've never stayed, how do I want to set this up? Go to your emoji picker. Right now, pull over your phone, or pull over your car if you're driving. And we're going to scroll in our emoji pickers together to the section of houses and buildings. And we're going to go down, and there's going to be, I think, a hospital and a bank, and then like a 24 building, like a 24-hour convenience center, then a school, and then an office building with an H and a heart, and then a church, or like a chapel. The H with a heart building is called a love hotel. Now, emoji is a Japanese word. Moji means character, and A means an illustration. So it's not actually, emotion has no part in the etymology of emoji. A lot of the emoji that we have are just because the character set was created in Japan first. They're little tidbits of Japanese culture. So like NG is a character because NG in Japanese is an example of what they call wasei eigo, or Japanese made English, because NG stands for no good. So if something's really bad for whatever reason, you say, oh yeah, that's NG. And it's got its own nuances and uses and stuff, but that's why they got an NG emoji. There's what I just directed your attention to, the little office building with the heart and the H in the heart, is a love hotel. And love hotels are also parts of Japanese culture. There's lots of stories, origin stories, if you're not familiar with love hotels. From a practical perspective, paper thin walls, multi-generational homes. If you want to get it on, there's not a lot of space in the traditional domicile to do that. And so the least scandalous use of a love hotel is for a married couple to get away from the kids. And so you can buy either a night at a love hotel, but much more commonly a rest. And they'll have like an hourly or a 3-hour rate to go to the love hotel. And then, well, this is an explicitly rated podcast. It's an explicit podcast, but using the phrase make love seems too extreme. So I'll just say fuck. It's where people go to fuck. And when you go to a love hotel, if you've ever been, spoiler alert, I have explored a couple love hotels in my day, but for hilarious reasons, not the straightforward one. If you go to a love hotel, it is mostly oriented around the things you would prioritize if a hotel was designed for fucking. Ugh. This is too much. But seriously though, like it's privacy, right? Like, so like you park at a love hotel, they will have little like iron license plate blockers that you could pull in, and then pull one of the license plate blockers to put in front of your car so that somebody with a camera could not come through and then blackmail you for having parked your vehicle in the middle of the day. Whether you're a government employee or just like maybe it's a PI hired by a suspicious spouse. You know, you go in, you don't see any face typically when you check in. Like nowadays, it's all, of course, touch screens. It's basically, if you've ever gone to a modern day McDonald's or a KFC, you know the deal. You go to the touch screen, you pick out what you want. And so modern day is a touch screen, but before then it was, you know, a sort of like a ticket window, but like usually you wouldn't see the person on the other side, and you know, you'd ask for what you want, and they'd quote a price, you'd pay in advance, they'd have you pay, and then they'd give you a key to a particular room and you'd go up. And now it's much more, just imagine that, but way more technology. The amenities in love hotels are often, because there's so much competition in love hotels to be nice, They usually have awesome bathtubs, bathrooms, really great amenities for free, you know, that because on average, people won't take advantage of many of them. But the point is like, this is a fun time, right? This is not just lodging. And so everything is seen through the lens of being fun, like having karaoke machines or having, you know, like all of the premium cable channels, which hotels normally in Japan don't have. Typically, like, you know, there's room service, like on your TV, you can order food, right? Which is something that most hotels, even luxury hotels in Japan, if they have it, it's like a Western style hotel and you're paying out the asshole for a shitty burger as room service. Here, it's like Japanese, like normal restaurant prices of like very affordable food. And everything's delivered nicely. Of course, you can also buy sex toys and other nonsense through the TV systems and whatnot. But here's how I ended up staying there. Like my most recent stay in a Love Hotel was Booking.com started listing Love Hotels in Japan. And if you're not careful, you might just accidentally book one. And they'll say like adults only in brackets. And that'll often be the only... If you don't know what to look for in the photos of the hotel, and you don't notice the adults only tag at the end of the title of the hotel, and you book on Booking.com, as far as you can tell, it's just like a really nice hotel, and it's suspiciously cheaper than a lot of the other hotels. And so, I ended up booking one in I think Ikebukuro in 2018. Because it was way cheaper than any other options. And the room was like twice as big. And then we got in and we're like, all right, this is where we are now. And the ordeal was actually super fun and super memorable just because it's like the business hotels in Japan are so bare bones that there's just a lot to explore. Get your mind out of the gutter. I mean, like in terms of buttons on the remote and karaoke machines and special bath salts. Not the Florida kind of bath salts, the kind of salt that you put into a bath. Anyway, I'm going to share a YouTube with you. That was all just to explain what the fuck this YouTube is. This is a YouTube video that the algorithm, which I am scared to say is learning stuff that Justin likes at an alarming rate. This is a Love Hotel with a 2-story water slide in the room. So you're checked into your room, you're exploring the room, you got the bathroom, and then there's another door behind the bathroom, and you have your own fucking water slide, and it's fast. This lady, I think, checked in. She's touring around the room. She tried to capture a video of her sliding, and it was clear like she flipped upside down or whatever, which is separately hilarious. But you just got to see it. Like, so if you've never seen a Love Hotel, scroll down in the show notes. Enjoy. This is as good of a walkthrough of a over-the-top Love Hotel as I've seen. And typically, like if you're now Love Hotel curious, typically in an urban environment, Love Hotels will be primarily situated by whatever the inside or next to the red light district that of the city that you're in. And there are some cities that that have the red light stuff, you know, kind of interspersed with residential, which is its own sort of cultural note. But in general, like those hotels are more competing on just location and availability, like a lot of hotels would. But this water slide one, at the beginning of the video, you'll see, I think it's like in a suburb off of suburb in, I want to say Nagoya, like in Aichi-ken. So like off the beaten path. And when you're off the beaten path, the Love Hotels, from my casual, I'm not a connoisseur of these things. Don't get the wrong idea. Although I've given you plenty to chew on that is the right idea and separately plenty of fodder to judge me for. Out off the beaten path, Love Hotels can have to attract people, right? Because you're not maybe it's a car-based area, right? Like where most people are driving around. Maybe there's not a red light district in the area that would like, you know, facilitate like high traffic volume into the Love Hotels. It's instead they've got to gin up a reason for you to come. And that's how you wind up with these hilarious gimmicks, like a room with a water slide in it. And so the most over the top love hotels tend to be in suburbs, because they've got to have something that you don't have at home to attract local residents to come and stay there or take a rest. So anyway, Love Hotel with a water slide. We got Ruby Kaigi coming up next month. I don't know how the Love Hotel landscape looks like in Okinawa, where the conference is. I don't. This is not an endorsement, but it's a hilarious piece of Japanese culture that is a direct result of the mashing up of their long and history and culture around sex, combined with the post-war economic miracle that the Western influence had on what to do about that. So if you feel like, hey, whoa, that Justin guy, he's dirty. This is too much. This is too much sin in my life. I will just remind you that you have a phone that has a love hotel in it, and you can't get rid of it. When you look at that emoji picker, you're there among the love hotels. So you're in this now. All right. Well, I think I probably recommended enough to you for one day. That was a lot. I was raised in a very Christian household. I'm not used to talking about sexy times in public. And so that made me feel a little bit uncomfortable, especially because midway through that story, I could tell Becky came home. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm a shy podcaster, so I hope she didn't hear any of that. And if she heard any of it, I hope she only heard the maximally embarrassing snippets that make me look ridiculous. So without further ado, let's put a pin in it, cover a couple of mailbag submissions. I gotta say, I need some more mailbag stuff. I'm really scraping the bottom of the mail barrel. No offense if I pick your comment today. I would love some fresh questions, comments, concerns, criticisms. Compliments are also welcome. That's podcast@searles.co. And tell you what, you can also email justin@searles.co, and I'll see it that way too. I would love, yes, please just, I don't know what to say. Like, what is it going to take? You know, people are all the time, like, they're saying, hey, comment here, engage with me or whatever. If you're 3 hours into this, I think I'm not charging you anything. There's no ads. You're still fucking here for some reason. I hope that you're okay. I hope it's not because you've become immobilized and you are now trapped with just my voice in your head and the life is fading out of your eyes. And this is all you got is me asking you as payment for listening to please just email me. But if that's the case, you're off the hook. Okay. I get it. You know, maybe you just had a terrible fall and you the last hour and a half of your life, you're like, oh my God, I got to listen to this Searles guy ramble while my body starts to shut down. But if that's the only person with an excuse, everybody else, you're here of your own volition. You're listening to this nonsense. I need you to do your part. I need you to email me podcast@searles.co with something, anything. If I can ramble for 3 hours, surely you can ramble into, dictating to your phone for 15 seconds. Stupid thought that comes into your head. Anything it is. If you don't want me to read your name, I won't read your name. But I need some stupid stuff to talk about. I need some chum to encourage me to keep at this. So if you've listened this far, I expect an email. God damn it. And even then, I know, like, even at that point, even with that much dressing on the feedback salad, I know that only like 2% of you will actually send an email. What the fuck is wrong with us? I think at some point we all just got twisted around the axle on how social media and how like every influencer and every content maker has to say these certain things to try to gin up engagement in the algorithm and so forth, that we all like know like, oh yeah, well I'm not going to like and subscribe. That's for other people to do. Please email me. All right. Speaking of people who did email me, Matt actually sent me an email a while ago with like 6 good questions, and I've been doling them out here and there because they're all good questions. Matt asks, do you have any spicy takes on the legalization of sports betting and recreational dogs Excuse me. Do you have any spicy takes on the legalization of sports betting and recreational drugs across much of the country? I've got all kinds of spicy takes. First of all, the idea of spicy recreational drugs makes me think like it would be kind of funny to have a THC infused hot sauce. And now I kind of want to see what that would be. I'm going to skip the drugs. This is a family show. Kidding. I don't have anything interesting to say about recreational drugs, other than I don't really care very much about any of this stuff that much. And I will say this. The reason that you can go to a restaurant and not be just completely engulfed in cigarette smoke, where I had a suede jacket through college and it was basically like a Geiger counter for cigarette smoke, because you'd come out at the end of every night and it was just, the thing would reek. There's no way to hide the fact that I was out, right? Be like, oh shoot, like, oh, now my whole dorm room just stinks. The only reason that we got rid of cigarette smoke was because secondhand smoke was a plausible, if not verifiable, like risk to people. So that means that like, if you just don't like it because it's stinky, if you don't like it because it's dirty, if you don't like what other people are doing in public because it's annoying, that's typically like the threshold for municipalities and for the federal government to like pass regulation to limit somebody's behavior in public. It's a high bar in America. And I think that if smoking was merely obnoxious and stinky, we probably would not have gotten to the level of both regulatory and social shaming that it took to more or less eliminate smoking from public life in America. I'm glad we did, because it's stinky. But it wasn't the stinkiness that sold people on it. Like, it gave us societal permission to basically shame the shit out of anyone who smoked. What did was the argument of secondhand smoke. Well, there are children, sir, in public, and you're puffing air that could hurt them. And so how dare you take a shared resource, a common good, like the ability to breathe, and then potentially give a kid lung cancer? It's indefensible, right? I don't think that we have a similar case. So like the analogy, right, is pot smoke. Like I was, Becky and I were staying at the new Evermore complex across the street, the new Conrad. And there was this one family. There were lots of people smoking pot, don't get me wrong. But over the course of our stay, I had to teach Becky what the word blunt really meant, because every elevator, it's just like, it was so fucking strong, the smell. And if it was just the smell, I don't think we'd be able to like, outlaw weed again. In Florida, it's technically, it's not free. That's actually one of the ballot measures, is recreational marijuana. Here I said I wasn't going to talk about it. It's only medical, but getting a cannabis card is relatively easy. So the smell is just obnoxious. If you're not in the mood, if you're not imbibing yourself, like if it's just stinks. And I hate that it stinks. And I don't like to be in places where things stink. And it might be socially acceptable, like, to tell somebody, hey, excuse me, but you're smoking marijuana like a cigarette, and I think it stinks. But like in this state where I have to assume that everyone in public has a firearm concealed, I'm very careful in what unsolicited feedback I dole out to passersby. And so instead, like, that experience made me think when I next heard about this fall's recreational marijuana constitutional amendment ballot initiative, which would have to hit 60% in order to pass here in Florida. I was like, man, maybe the medicinal is as a barrier of entry, which granted is extremely exclusionary, favors people who have insurance, favors people who have a car, who can drive, who can pay the $200 a year fee to get the card. Like, all of those hurdles are, they gate the access to free, legal, safe marijuana to people with privilege. And yet, like, maybe having some hoops to jump through wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, because if you've been to like any of the American cities where like weed is full and freely legal, like, it just everywhere, every street corner just absolutely reeks now. So I don't know what to do about that. I think in general, the secondhand smoke was potentially harmful. It robbed the nation of an opportunity to talk about, like, maybe just stinking up the joint shouldn't be a right. Maybe if you smell like dog shit, people should be able to make you go away or take a shower. Like, I'm not talking about homelessness here. I'm just talking about in general. If, I'm a very sensitive sense of smell. It is strong smelling perfume feels like a violence being inflicted upon me, and it's really distracting, and it causes headaches for me too. I inherited a lot of these sensitivity traits from my dear mother, who is also quite sensitive. So when you talk about recreational drugs becoming free or becoming legal, Matt, that's all I think about is just the inconvenience to my nostrils, as opposed to the 20 issues that are more important to society. But again, in terms of how this affects me in my weekend, which is by far the most important interest in my book, I just wish it weren't so goddamn stinky. I wish people, you eat your edibles or, tinctures or whatever the fuck, but like, God, just don't stink up the joint. Have some, look, part of the reason why I love Japan is there's a theory of the case that the worst thing that you can do as a member in a collectivist society is to act out such that you interrupt or interfere with other people. You put your shoe up on the bench across you in the train, and you make the seat dirty for the next person. You are loud. You're disruptive. People can't focus. People don't feel safe, right? You eat in the street, and then, maybe some of your ice cream or your gum drops onto the floor and somebody else steps on it. Like, these are all in the Japanese social contract. What's the word? Inviolable? Like it is a foundation of what everyone expects of one another. And it does mean sometimes that, like, it can be a little bit of a bummer pants to be like, oh, well, yeah, there's no chewing gum in here or whatever. Or there's no taking photos inside a lot of stores. Most stores won't let you take pictures. And the primary reason is the privacy and comfort of other guests who are shopping take precedence over your ability to snap a bunch of photos inside the store. So yeah, that's my big take on, I wasn't going to comment on that, but here I am. The one I think is more interesting is sports betting, because there was just an NBA player who got served a lifetime ban for betting in NBA stuff and also pulling himself out of games because he had prop bets set up for his own performance. Pete Rose, of course, famously bet on baseball, and that was considered to be terrible. And while he was playing baseball, and he got a lifetime ban in the 80s. I think the way that sports betting became so like liberalized in America was so circuitous and roundabout, where it's like FanDuel and DraftKings kind of find an end run around, well, technically you're not betting, it's a game of skill now, and you're setting up a draft that only lasts for a day. And then the industry saw that and they were like, oh shoot, like now we can just kind of reframe a whole lot of stuff as like a game of skill. And then the Supreme Court blew the doors open on it. I think that with how little energy I've got left to explain what I feel about this, there's a YouTube channel called Good Work, and I'm going to share in the show notes his episode on sports betting. It's very, very good. And I couldn't agree more with most of what he says in it. And also he's hilarious. All right. Check. Let's do one more. Yeah, let's do one more and call it. Spencer asks, what do you think about the cloud exit initiative at 37 Signals? So 37 Signals used to be called Basecamp, but before that it was called 37 Signals also. They make tools like Basecamp, for fuck's sake. I actually was invited to speak they had a corporate retreat in Chicago in like 2016. And I was invited to speak. I gave a rendition of my social coding contract talk. So I was at their office, had a great time, really awesome team. At that time, they had 2 data centers. So this must have been before they moved to the cloud. My understanding, talking to Will Jessup, who's doing a lot of their infrastructure work there at the time, was that they had a London and an American-based server, like one in each, and that they had like enough load balancing to handle it. And with just 2 endpoints, that was more than enough. And they must have gone up to the cloud after that, where they were using like probably, I assume, I don't know any beyond that, like other than that they were in AWS and they were paying out the snot holes for the scale that they were for Basecamp and for Hay. And so if you're not familiar, DHH has been leading the charge on how do we move us out of the cloud, which is extremely expensive, and it might feel like a safe bet because everyone's in the cloud. It's just adding more and more single points of failure all up and down your stack as you're fanned out across 35 different services that are all, for example, US East 1 is a phrase that like lots of developers know, but it refers to one facility, one place in where AWS has a lot of servers. And if you've used Amazon Web Services, God forbid there's an earthquake or a fire at that one location, there's all kinds of important mission critical production data that is literally not replicated anywhere else in the world except for right there. Because when you set up all kinds of stuff in Amazon Web Services, it's not going into the cloud. It's not going into Ether. It's not in, all of their servers distributed in some sort of reliable way. There are certain services that are like CloudFront, because that's literally like the point of that service is to distribute stuff as a CDN all over the world. There's like a lot of shit. It's just like what you're doing is you're paying a really, really high premium to use one specific server in one specific place. And it's not even the place that you would pick based on where your users and customers live. It's based on whatever was best for Amazon or Microsoft or Google or whatever. So I think that there is a tremendous, what did you say? Maybe like the value differential that there are so many decisions getting made about the infrastructure that is actually to the benefit of, if not the cloud service provider like Amazon, then to the median customer. That if you think about the 800 choices that you might need to make about the infrastructure and the architecture of a software application, if you aren't like a dead ringer for what these cloud services want to be, if your performance and your scaling and your usage characteristics, like the volume of usage or the amount of data that you host or whatever, if you don't check all these boxes just so, you can wind up really overpaying or having way worse performance characteristics than just buying a nice desktop PC and putting it on an on-premises hosting location and then managing it yourself. So what I respect about it is I think that there's a lot of dogma around, of course, the cloud is better. And how many fucking years now is CIO magazine just talking about digital transformations? Well, before that, it was all about cloud initiatives. And every CIO and CTO in the country were like, oh, well, you still have an on-premises server farm. You must be a fucking dolt, right? Because everything's in the cloud. And so I always appreciate it when people like David will challenge. I'm a provocative guy. He is just 10 times more provocative than I am, because I identified this grenade years ago, but I just wasn't willing to put my time, money, and voice behind it quite so boldly. To go against the grain that like the cloud is inherently right. I'm not going to say it takes bravery, but it takes a willingness to be told that you're an idiot, and it takes a willingness to build a lot of shit that nobody else has built to facilitate something like moving out of the cloud. Because like once you realize that the real situation when you're fully in like all these cloud services is that, oh, this is like just like my iPhone, right? Like we're talking about vendor lock-in. Like Amazon keeps introducing new services like Lambda or like, custom Redshift Postgres stuff, and all of these little things that are so nice that confer such benefits to me also represent like vendor lock-in, because now if I were to move the application, it is tightly coupled to the way that the particularities of this infrastructure or to the particular services on this infrastructure. And it's now less portable than it would have been, even though the marketing promise of moving to the cloud is like all these computers are transient, temporary, destroyable infrastructure that you can move around more freely than ever. That was all a marketing lie, because once people were in the door and people started moving to the cloud, it became, how do we lock them in? How do we keep them from churning onto, because no one wants to be a commodity. Right. So in the heads of like Amazon and Microsoft, their product people can go to work and get dressed in the morning, knowing that like what they're really trying to do is provide value to customers by solving problems that customers have. Right. And it just so happens that the way that like new solutions get created is like proprietary extensions to standard stuff. And then it ends up with the end game being, unless you're going to go the extra mile to create everything in a standard and open way, which is extra work, costs money, and also reduces the lock-in effect, you wind up with, oh, well, I solve a customer problem. I can feel good about that. And also, so it does happen to mean it's not the customer's responsibility to like unwind that themselves if they want to move off. So it was a lot of work, I'm sure, for 37 Signals to go off the cloud. And I'm sure that they are saving a lot of money. What I respect and what I'm grateful for is that tools like Kamal, which is like a way to containerize a Rails application in a conventional way, so that it can be deployed pretty much everywhere in a way that is truly actually portable. The tools that shook out of that initiative, I believe, make independent of Ruby and Rails, are like things that should exist that people could benefit from, that deserve more attention. And like a lot of the things that David does for good and for bad, it attracts a lot of attention. So I suspect that there are a lot of new teams building new things who are seriously asking the question, should I go in the cloud or not? That would otherwise have just followed the crowd and done it without critically thinking. And I'm a fan of critically thinking. And so anytime a provocateur comes in and, upsets the apple cart, there is a collateral benefit of forcing people to ask, maybe it's better for the apple cart to be upended. Whereas normally it would have just sat in the background and it would never have gotten our attention or our focus. So anyway, my shit's all in Heroku, which means it's almost all, if not all, in US East 1, which means I have a daily backup that I pull down locally and I pray. If I was operating at a really big scale, though, I would do this math. So yeah, I don't know. I think it's pretty neat. Thank you for the question, Spencer. Remember, if you're out there, your homework is to go to find an email client. That's step 1. Find an email client, create an email account if you don't have one. There's lots of places to get a free email account. Hotmail.com is one of them. Create an email account. And then when you have your email account and you're in the inbox, you click compose. It's usually called compose. Command N might open a new window. And then you type in podcast@searls.co. And then you just type in whatever spicy bullshit nonsense you want into the subject line and into the body. And then you click send. Easy as that. That's your homework. All right. Well, this has been fun. This has been too long, and too long is just right here at Breaking Change. I will talk to you next time.